Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunting Whispers. I'm aware that many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if each of you could leave a comment letting me know which part of the world you're listening from. Also, give a like and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Okay, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I work at a motel. I think skinwalkers are staying here. If you're ever driving down Route 106 in Michigan and you see a sign for the Greenbrier Motel, you better just keep on driving. Because there is something terribly wrong here, and the last thing I would want is for more people to die. I started working at the Greenbrier Motel a week ago. It wasn't a dream job by any standards. Night shift at the front desk, checking people in and out, doing some inventory in the back. I liked the peace and quiet, though. As a little rundown motel on a stretch of isolated highway in Michigan, it gave me a lot of time to read and play computer games on the clock. It also helped that the owner, Frank, didn't seem to care I was a high school dropout with a rap sheet. But on the very first day, I felt that something was terribly off. For one, there was the smell. When the wind shifted, the entire parking lot smelled like rotting meat. I ran to close the windows, but even then I could still smell it, seeping in through the HVAC system. The motel is surrounded by deep woods, so I figured maybe we were near the kill grounds of some animal. Or maybe it was just the endless roadkill of deer and possums on the highway. Either way, it was unsettling, and definitely not enjoyable. The other thing that struck me as odd were the guests' rooms. Some of them didn't have windows, and it seemed like that was intentional. I could see the lines in the paint, the seams outlining where windows had once been. When I asked Frank, he told me that some of the guests asked for windowless rooms, that they were in high demand. He didn't elaborate, and honestly, I was a little scared to press him on it. Things went from strange to downright creepy, however, as soon as Frank left. As I got set up at my desk, a woman walked into the room. She was in her 40s maybe, with black hair and very pale skin. As soon as she stepped inside, she locked the door behind her. "Frank left, right?" she asked me. "Yeah," I replied. Who are you?" She introduced herself as Matilda. She'd been working here for a decade, cleaning the motel rooms after the guests checked out. After a few minutes of small talk, she suddenly came up to the counter and lowered her voice. "I want to make sure you're safe around here," she said, glancing back towards the door nervously. "So I need you to listen to me, okay?" My heart dropped. Okay. Whatever you do, don't ask questions. Just check people in, check them out, and mind your own business, and then you'll be fine. My stomach did a little flip. Okay, so it was that kind of motel. Illegal business of multiple kinds, probably, all being conducted under our dilapidated roof. What? What if the police come? Will I be arrested too? She gave me a blank stare. The police? Say they find evidence of illegal activity in one of the rooms. Will that get me in trouble? I already have shoplifting on my record and can't. She shook her head. Don't worry about the police. Just don't ask questions, and don't make eye contact or look at their faces for too long. I swallowed. They don't want witnesses. They don't want me to be able to pick them out of a lineup, I thought. Okay, I won't ask questions, and I won't look at them for too long. Got it. She smiled at me. You have nothing to worry about. As it turned out, though, I had quite a lot to worry about. That night, I checked in 3 people. They were almost like caricatures. A big, strong guy in sunglasses that looked like he'd stepped right out of The Godfather. A woman dressed to the nines, wearing a more makeup than a clown. A skinny young guy in a hoodie that smelled of something chemical and strange. But I listened to Matilda. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even ask the questions I should have been asking. Like when Hoodie Guy gave me an ID that was clearly fake. Don't ask questions and you'll be fine. I kept repeating that to myself, and I kept my eyes glued to the computer screen, never even glancing up at them. When it hit midnight, I assumed the rest of the night would be smooth sailing. On this lonely stretch of highway, it was unlikely anyone else would check in. I pulled up Minesweeper and played some music on my phone. My peace and quiet, however, was interrupted by the door swinging open. At 2 a.m. I glanced up to see the guy in sunglasses, the guy who looked like he'd stepped out of The Godfather. Oh no, I should have locked the door. I swallowed and kept my eyes glued to the computer screen as he approached. "Can I help you?" I asked, watching him in my peripheral vision. "Do you have any razors for purchase?" I froze. Razors? At 2 a.m.? I instantly got a mental image of him slashing someone up in his room. Blood all over the sheets, soaking into the carpet. No, we don't have any razors," I said, keeping my eyes on the computer screen. "Can you just check in the back, please?" I swallowed. I really didn't want to go check. As soon as I turned around, he could do anything. Pull out a gun, tackle me, force me into a chokehold and keep me hostage. But refusing him was just as bad, if not worse. It might make him mad. Really mad. I sat there, staring at Minesweeper on the screen, weighing my options, paying close attention to him out of the corner of my eye. And that's when I saw it. There was something off about this guy. His sunglasses looked like they were slightly too low on his face, like the eyes they were covering weren't in quite the right place. And not only that, but I couldn't see his eyebrows poking above the frames or the contours of his brow ridge. Everything above the glasses was perfectly flat and smooth, like he had no eye sockets at all. "Can you check in the back, please?" he asked again, his voice taking on an annoyed tone. "Yes, sure." I sprung out of the seat and ducked into the back storage area. I quickly glanced over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following me, but he wasn't. I had half a mind to just stay there, hiding out in the back storage room, until I heard his voice calling me. "Did you find them?" He sounded angry, approaching furious. Thankfully, I did find a few packaged razors next to some spare toothbrushes and soap we kept. I grabbed them and handed them over, keeping my eyes trained on the floor. "Thank you," he said, sounding pleased. And that was it. He turned around and left. As soon as the door shut, I ran over and locked it. I closed the blinds and sat back down at the front desk, my heart hammering in my chest. All I could picture were the strange contours of his face. And as I sat there, I realized something. All 3 guests that I'd checked in since the start of my shift, the Godfather guy, the makeup woman, the hoodie guy, had something covering their face or head. I mean, I wasn't exaggerating about the woman having enough makeup for a clown. She was wearing foundation so thick that it cracked around the corners of her eyes and lips, and wore false eyelashes so long they gave the appearance of spider legs. And Hoodie Guy had kept his hood pulled so tightly over his head that his ears and hair weren't visible. It was like they all had something to hide. Morning couldn't come soon enough. As soon as the day shift workers arrived, I got the hell out of there. I floored it back to my house and slept for a long time, my sleep plagued with nightmares of faceless people and spidery eyelashes. Then it was time to go back to the motel for night number 2. Thankfully, it was a quieter night. Although the vacancy sign glowed brightly in the darkness, no one checked in during my shift. They must have all come earlier, during the day shift. I locked the door, sat down with a cup of coffee, and enjoyed getting some reading done in the quiet. Unfortunately, the quiet didn't last long. Around midnight, I heard a loud slam from outside. I threw my book down and ran over to the window. The door to room 16 was wide open. I looked around. Nobody appeared to be outside. The parking lot and the sidewalk were empty. The room itself was dark. None of the lights were on. I walked over to the computer and looked up the room. To my surprise, no one had booked it for tonight. Should I go out and close the door? I hesitated. It was late. There was no one around, except for the occasional passing car. If someone had broken into that room and then attacked me, there would be no one to hear me scream. So I kept the door locked tight and accessed the security camera feed instead. As I rewound it, I saw what happened. The door had opened, and then a woman had walked out of it. I couldn't see her face, just her long dark hair. She then disappeared into room 22. I checked room 22 on the computer and saw it was booked to a woman named Cassandra Johnson. I frowned. Looked like Cassandra might be going into our vacant rooms and possibly stealing stuff. Matilda must have forgotten to lock up the room after she cleaned it. I sighed, opened the door, and began walking towards the open room. I thought of knocking on room 22, but then thought better of it. Keep your nose out of other people's business. I'd just lock up room 16 and go back to the lobby, like a good little employee. I walked towards to the open room, but as soon as I got close, a horrible smell wafted out of the room. like something rotting, decaying. My stomach turned. What did Cassandra do in there? Throw up? Stash all her garbage in there? I reached into the darkness of the room. Bracing myself, I flicked on the light. The room looked normal. The bed was made. The carpet was clean. But the smell had only intensified. I pinched my nose as I glanced around, starting to feel nauseous. And then I saw it. There was something on the carpet, just barely poking out from the other side of the bed. What is that? It was tan and folded over itself, like a beige sheet or pillowcase had been bunched up on the other side. But all our sheets were white. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. The smell got even worse as I approached the bed. Nausea washed over me. I forced myself to keep going, pinching my nose, swallowing down the urge to throw up. I peered over the side of the bed and froze. There was a pile of beige, slightly translucent material folded over itself on the other side, but I instantly recognized certain shapes attached to it. Awfully familiar shapes. Like 5 fingers, resembling a glove made of skin, poking out from under one of the folds. It looked like someone had shed their skin. I stepped back, my legs shaking underneath me. No, there's no way. It can't be. I backed away towards the door, my throat dry, because it didn't make sense. It didn't even make sense with a horrible crime. There wasn't any blood on it. It hadn't been cut off someone. It was like a snake skin, clean and perfect, holding the shape of its wearer like a ghost. I ran out of the room and saw, walking towards me down the sidewalk, the woman from room 22. Strands of her dark, straight hair hung over her face, but I could tell, through her hair, that there was something wrong with her face. Her eyes, her lips, were in slightly the wrong position. She strode towards me, fast, her shoes clicking on the pavement. I didn't want to find out what she'd do if she caught me. I whipped around and ran as fast as I could. I could hear her behind me, but I forced myself to go faster and faster until I was inside the lobby. I clicked the lock shut and collapsed in the back room, where she couldn't see me. That's when the whistling started. Just outside the door, I could hear her, whistling. The source of the sound shifted as she circled the lobby area, looking for a way in. I heard it at the door, then at the back, then through the side windows, then back at the front door. This went on for an hour. Finally, the whistling faded. But I didn't move. I stayed there, huddled in the back storage room until dawn broke. As soon as the day shift arrived, I booked it out of there as fast as I could. I wanted to quit. With everything I am, I wanted to just walk away. But I needed the money. I already knew how hard it was, finding a job with a rap sheet. It was either go back to the job or face eviction. So I went back. When I got on shift, though, I pulled Matilda aside and told her what I'd seen. I asked her again and again if my life was in danger. Asked her what the hell was going on here. If other people were in danger too. I promise you, as long as you mind your own business, you'll be safe. So that's what I did. I minded my own business. And for the next few days, nothing of note happened. Sure, there were a few people who checked in that were wearing hats or sunglasses or extra makeup, but I just tried to avoid eye contact with them. Tried to keep my head down and my nose out of other people's business. But then came the night of November 14. It was raining that night. The rain came down in sheets, and every so often, I heard a peal of thunder shake the windows. I wasn't expecting anyone to come in that night, as I hadn't seen that many cars driving by on the highway. The rain seemed to keep everybody in. But then I heard a knock. When I looked up, I saw a man staring in the window. A chill ran down my spine. He was wearing a hoodie that hid his head and kept his face mostly in shadow, and he was rather aggressively banging on the window, like he was in a hurry. I grabbed the mace I kept under the counter and slipped it into my pocket. Then I approached the window. "Do you have any vacancies?" he asked in a low voice, barely audible above the pounding rain. The vacancy sign glowed brightly behind him. There's no way he could have missed it. "Yeah, come on in," I said, unlocking the door with one hand and gripping the mace in my pocket with the other. He stepped inside. Rain dripped off his jacket and onto the floor. I barely glanced at him, turning around and walking back around the counter. Then I sat down at the computer, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. In my peripheral vision, I could see him, leaning over the counter, his face only about a foot or two from mine. so close that I could smell the stale, mothball odor coming off his clothes. So close I could hear drops of water plopping onto the counter from his sleeve. "Can you go faster?" he asked, his voice raspy in his throat. "Sorry, sir. I'm going fast as I can," I replied, my heart starting to pound. "It's an old computer." My fingers slipped on the mouse as I rushed to click the buttons. "I don't have all day," he growled, looming even closer to me. I wanted to look at him. My eyes were itching to glance up at the man that was 6 inches from my face. But I forced myself to stare at the screen. Whatever the hell was going on here, I was not going to be a witness. I was not going to look up and find myself face to face with a Smith & Wesson. "Your name?" I asked. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I froze. I needed a name to book the room. That's all. But maybe he wouldn't see it that way. Maybe I wasn't supposed to ask for names. Maybe that was part of Frank's understanding with certain guests. Thankfully, nothing happened. After a second of hesitation, he replied, "Daniel Jones." The name struck me as fake. Common first name, common last name. But who even cared at this point? I typed his name into the system and completed the booking process. He paid for the room in cash, which was another unnerving detail, but I tried not to worry about it. I turned my back and took a key off the hook. "Room 7, I said, handing it to him. He thanked me and then waited by the door. I waited for a minute, then 2, but he didn't leave. "Do you need something?" I asked, careful not to make eye contact. "Can you escort me to my room?" Oh, hell no. There was no way I could go out there, in the middle of the night, with this creepy guy. That was like a death sentence. I glanced out the window and spotted his car, a beat-up sedan, in one of the nearby parking spaces. The murder scenario played out in my head. Shoves me into the hotel room, kills me, sticks my body in the trunk, throws it in the middle of the woods, or maybe worse. Maybe my skin would end up crumpled on the floor of one of the rooms. Maybe he'd take my form, or turn me into something that sheds its skin like a snake. That has eyes too low on its face, or no eye sockets at all. And the longer I looked at him in the corner of my eye, the more I noticed how unsavory he looked. There were smears of dirt on his sleeves and on the hem of his pants. "Like he's been digging a grave," the voice in my head added. His face, half hidden in shadow, was sunken and gaunt. His jaw was covered in gray stubble, and his teeth were a horrible shade of grayish yellow. Can't you just go yourself? I have something that I need to do here. My boss is going to be mad. You can take 2 minutes to walk me to my room, damn it." I sat there in stunned silence. He sounded furious. My heart pounded in my ears. "Okay," I said finally. My fingers curled around the mace in my pocket, and then I joined him by the door. "I'll walk you to your room." He didn't thank me. He just grabbed the door and swung it open, nearly letting it swing back in my face. I stepped out into the pouring rain with him. The parking lot was a lake, and our feet sloshed loudly through the water. The cold water seeped through my sneakers, and I shivered. I followed the man to his car, staying a good 15 feet away. He popped the trunk, and I held my breath. But thankfully, there was only a duffel bag inside. He hoisted it on his shoulder and started for room 7. I followed him at a distance, staying several feet away, watching him fidget with the key. "You got a lot of other people staying here right now?" he asked as he slid the key into the lock. "Some," I replied. "Not great weather for it." "Not really. The storm's supposed to clear tomorrow. It'll be good weather then." Wow, this is taking a while, I thought to myself. That's when I looked down at his hands and noticed that he wasn't really trying to get into his room. He was just inserting the key, pausing, and then pulling it out. Over and over again. He was stalling for time. He was keeping me here on purpose. I looked up from his hands, just in time to see him staring at me. His blue eyes were intense, studying me. I wanted to run away. Every inch of me was screaming to get out of there. But the guy had 6 inches on me and was really thin. He'd probably catch me in seconds. I was never much of a runner. I slipped my hand in my pocket, curling my fingers around the mace. "Do you need help getting into your room?" I asked. He shook his head. "I'm going to go back to the front desk," I said, taking a step back. As soon as I said that, he froze. His eyes widened as he stared at me. Slowly, he shook his head, his lips stretching into a grimace that revealed his yellowed teeth. "Don't go," he growled, his voice barely audible above the rain. Stay exactly where you are. I leapt into action. I whipped the mace out of my pocket and held it in front of me, pointing it right at him. Don't get any closer. My finger hovered over the trigger, and then I heard it. Someone was whistling. Behind me, somewhere in the rain, the song cut through the pattering raindrops like a knife. It was the same eerie tune that woman had whistled a few days ago. I'm sorry, the man said quietly, his blue eyes locked on mine. But I needed bait. I stared at him. My brain couldn't even process what he was saying. Bait. I took a stumbling step back. The whistling grew louder. I whipped around. Through the rain, I could see someone walking through the parking lot, barely lit by the flickering street lamp. The mace fell from my hands and clattered to the ground. Then I turned and ran as fast as I could towards the lobby. The whistling stopped, and then I could hear loud, splashing footsteps, growing louder with every second behind me. I swung the door open, slammed it shut, and turned the lock. I pulled the blinds down over the window. Panting, I parted them with my fingertips and peered out into the night. There was a woman standing in the parking lot. The same woman I had seen a week ago. Her hair and clothes were drenched with rain, but she was smiling, this big lopsided grin that sent chills down my spine. And her eyes were strange, wide and wild, incredibly light blue. In the darkness, it almost looked like she didn't have irises at all. Just two pinholes for pupils, staring right at my door. No. She took a step forward. I ran over to my desk, grabbed my cell phone, started dialing 911. Come on. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at the Greenbrier Motel, and there's this guy and this weird woman. Thump. I was cut off by a loud thump nearby. I ran to the window and peered out. The man who'd booked room 7 was running towards the woman. He was holding something up in the air. A short dagger, gleaming silver in the rain. He's attacking her! I screamed into the phone. The woman's face changed. Her features twisted. Her grin crept up to her eyes. Her arms crackled and stretched. She blinked and her eyes turned pure white. Her body twisted unnaturally at the waist so that she was facing the man. With fast, jolted movements, she leapt at him. Within seconds, he was dead. She stood on all fours above him, her knees bent the wrong way, her fingers far too long. With another horrible crackling sound, her neck stretched out 2 feet long, twisting and serpentine. And then she looked at me. I leapt away from the window with a scream. What's happening? The operator asked me. Sir, please, tell me what's happening. I opened my mouth, tried to speak, but only a squeaking sound came out. By the time I made it back over to the window, the woman was standing there, looking down at her kill. She looked normal. Then she stepped over his body and walked towards the rooms. To my horror, she pulled out a key and opened room 22. Then she disappeared inside. The police arrived a few minutes later. In strings of gibberish, I begged them to check room 22. That something horrible was lurking inside. But then they knocked on the door. A completely normal-looking woman opened it. I watched from the lobby. I couldn't hear that much of their conversation over the pouring rain, but they weren't arresting her, weren't accusing her. They seemed to just be having a friendly conversation, asking her what she'd seen. Then they thanked her and came back to me. We'll need to see the security tapes from tonight, please, the officer said in an accusing tone. But when I showed them the tapes, they got quiet. One of the officers made a call to someone, saying something about an infestation. The other 2 officers ushered me out into the lobby, their faces grim. They told me not to leave as they talked among themselves in hushed voices in the corner of the room. Then they approached. You didn't see anything tonight, the tall man said, leaning in close. You got that? But what about... Listen to me very carefully, he interrupted, lowering his voice. You didn't see anything. Just like you never shoplifted in your life. What? You understand me? He asked. The silence stretched out between us. Yeah, I got it, I said, my voice wavering. I didn't see anything. I left the motel and never went back. I planned to never speak of what I saw. To keep my mouth shut, just like they told me to. But after losing many nights of sleep, I realized that I need to warn people. I need to warn you. I can't have another person dying because of these things, whatever they are. So I beg you, if you're driving through Michigan and see that there's a vacancy at the Greenbrier Motel, keep driving. If you thought that was bad, The next story will make your skin crawl. I witnessed something at the church near my house. I wish I hadn't. Something strange is happening at the small church near my house. I've stumbled upon some horrific things there, and I'm not sure what to do. I live in the suburbs, in a quiet area with 15 houses scattered around. Going into the city takes 40 minutes by car. I don't know any of my neighbors. I only know John, who lives closest to me. I work as a data engineer for an insurance company, but I won't bore you with the details. What matters is that it takes me 2 hours to get to work, so my days are long. I wake up at 5 a.m. and don't get home until 8 p.m. I usually don't do anything once I get home because I am too exhausted. Only on the weekends do I have some time for myself, which I use to work on my photography skills. Last Wednesday, I went to a restaurant with my colleagues for a team outing after work. I still had to work a 9 to 5 that day, so I felt drained before it even started. Socializing is already tough for me as an introvert, and keeping up with the group was exhausting. I mostly stuck to polite conversation, as I'm not sure what kind of conversations I'm supposed to have with colleagues that aren't work-related. We stayed at the restaurant until 9 p.m., and since it was in the opposite direction of my house, I had a 2.5-hour drive ahead of me to get home. As I was driving back, I hit another delay, a crash on the highway that added another 30 minutes. I was frustrated, knowing I'd barely have any time to rest before the next workday. It was nearly 11 p.m. when I finally got onto the quiet suburban roads near my house. It was pitch black, and even with my headlights on, I had to be extra careful because wildlife could jump out at any moment. It once happened to me that a deer jumped in front of my car and just stood there. I barely managed to stop in time, but ever since then, I've been extra careful. When I was about 10 minutes from home, I passed by the small church. It always seemed a bit eerie to me. It's never really used except for the occasional funeral. The building seems to be on the older side, so I assume it's kept around for its historical value. The church looked particularly sinister that night. Despite my tiredness, I saw an opportunity to take a good picture for my photography portfolio. I stopped the car and took a few photos, then went back inside to review them. In one of the photos, I noticed something. After adding some filters to the photo to enhance the quality, I saw a bike and a person sitting on a bench near the church. It wasn't visible in the other pictures, probably because of the angle and the darkness. It was strange for someone to be at the church that late, so I looked back at the bench from my car, but I could not see the person sitting there. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out. I got out of the car and walked toward the church. The bike was still there, but there was no sign of the person. Then I heard a noise coming from inside the church. Why would someone be inside at this hour? Looking back, my tiredness had clouded my judgment as I decided to investigate. I walked up to one of the windows and peered inside. Instead of seeing the main hall, I saw a small side room. I couldn't get a view of the main area, so I quietly made my way to the front door and opened it. As soon as I did, I could hear chanting. I moved further in, hoping to hear what they were saying. I found myself in a small hallway that led to the room I had seen earlier and another door that opened to the main hall. The chanting was coming from there. I peeked inside, and what I saw made my stomach turn. 6 people were standing in a circle, chanting in front of the altar. I recognized one of them as my neighbor, John. He's always been a down-to-earth guy. I could not find a reasonable explanation for why I found him in a situation like this. In the middle of the circle was a young girl, tied up with a piece of cloth in her mouth, presumably to stop her from screaming. The chanting continued, and that's when a 7th person entered the room, holding a staff. He must have been their leader, because the others immediately turned toward him as he approached the altar. Tonight, we will live. The world is against our practices. Therefore, we shall not engage, but sacrifices must be made, not for us, but for him. Fearless leader, accept our offering. Bless us with your guidance, your wisdom, and riches. I realized I had walked into some kind of cult ritual. The group resumed chanting as the leader approached the girl. After they finished, each of them cut their arm with a knife, letting the blood drip onto her. Please accept our offering and bless us with your guidance, wisdom, and riches." Before I could fully grasp what was happening, the leader plunged the knife into the girl's stomach. Without thinking, I screamed, "No," which I instantly regretted. Their heads turned toward me. One of them started running toward me, and I bolted out of there as fast as I could. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and started the engine just as the man tried to open the door. He stared at me with a big twisted smile as I sped away. I called the police as soon as I got home, explaining what I had witnessed, but they believed I was prank calling them. I didn't sleep at all that night. The man who chased me saw my face. John knows who I am. They'll find me. This morning, I found a letter in front of my door. "You are invited to celebrate the church's 350-year anniversary. Please help me." You may think the last story was horrifying, but trust me, things are about to get much worse. There is something wrong with my town. For the past 6 months, I've been spiraling deeper into a realization that horrifies me. I've uncovered evidence that my entire life has been a lie. But the biggest concern is that something far more sinister is happening, and I'm at a complete loss for what to do next. About 6 months ago, I was visiting my friend's house, which is located next to mine. Both of us being homeschooled, having each other to talk to is a relief, because living in a rural town, there wasn't really anyone else our age to connect with. We ended up spending the afternoon watching TV, flipping through the few channels our remote town could get. Since his parents were away, we could do anything we wanted. Suddenly, my friend suggested that he would go downstairs to the kitchen to grab some snacks. I was relieved, since I really needed to use the bathroom, but was too shy to ask. As a quiet homeschooled kid, I always hesitated to ask for anything, even from those I considered close friends. We both got up from my friend's bed and walked toward the hallway, where we ended up splitting up. He was heading towards the kitchen, and I was going to the bathroom. After finishing up, I stepped out, and on my way back to the bedroom, I noticed something strange. The door at the end of the hallway was half open. I'd visited my friend's house for about 4 years at that point and had never seen that door open before, nor any door for that matter. My teenage curiosity piqued, and so did I. With adrenaline flooding my veins, I approached the door, knowing I shouldn't be snooping around, but the urge was impossible to resist. As I reached the door, I pushed it open, expecting to see an office or maybe a bedroom. What I found confused me. The room was completely empty. Backing away slowly, I carefully left the door just as I had found it and returned to my friend's room, waiting patiently for his return. I had already decided not to mention my discovery to him, knowing full well that I shouldn't have been snooping in the first place. My friend returned, having an unsettling look painted across his face. "Were you in that room?" he asked, his voice low and trembling. "I wasn't," I replied, trying to shake off the sense of dread creeping in. He sat next to me, his movements awkward and jerky, like reality had fractured. There was something unnatural about the way he carried himself, as if he were a puppet. "Were you in that room?" he repeated, flipping through channels as if searching for something he couldn't name. "Man, I wasn't in the room," I insisted, my heart racing. In an instant, his head snapped toward me, eyes wide, pupils dilated. "Were you in that room?" The words came out in a rush, tumbling from his lips like a chant. "Dude, you're freaking me out. What's wrong with you?" I shot back, the unease bubbling over into irritation. But he didn't hear me. "Were you in that room? Were you in that room? Were you in that room?" His voice grew louder and more frantic, each repetition a jarring reminder of my own unsettling discovery. I could feel my pulse quickening, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. It was like he was pulling me into a trap, ensnaring me in his obsession with that empty room. I tried to turn away, to focus on anything else, but his gaze locked onto mine, unyielding. It was as if he was trying to read my thoughts, to pull the truth from my mind. "Stop it," I shouted, my voice breaking the spell. "What's going on?" But he just kept staring, his lips moving soundlessly, trapped in a loop that I couldn't escape. "Good night," he suddenly said, turning the TV off and laying down. The hours passed, and eventually, my friend fell asleep. I was staying over at his house that night, trying to calm down and go to sleep by thinking that he was just messing around. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about that empty room and what had happened afterwards. There was something about it that pulled me in to investigate, like a magnet. What I do next is what gets me into the situation I'm in now. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake my friend, and left the bedroom. I went back to that room, but nothing seemed different. Still, something didn't feel right. I decided to check around the rest of the house, letting only the moonlight from outside guide me. I moved from room to room, opening each door one by one, and discovered that every single room was empty. The only furnished rooms were the kitchen, the living room, the upstairs bedroom, and the bathroom. Even his supposed parents' room was completely bare. Now, I wasn't just confused, I was overwhelmed by a growing sense of unease. It was as if the house was designed so only the rooms someone could visit were furnished. I hurried back to bed, eventually falling asleep and waking up early the next morning. Before my friend even woke, I quietly left his house, leaving a note with a flimsy excuse for my early departure, and headed back home. Sitting at my desk, staring blankly at the wall in front of me, it hit me like a wave. 15 years of blocked memories came flooding back. My heart nearly stopped as a terrifying thought crept into my mind. What if my house was the same? My parents had always forbidden me from entering any rooms except the kitchen, living room, bathroom, and my bedroom. I knew I had to find the strength to check the rest of the house, but that was easier said than done. The last time my parents caught me trying to sneak into their bedroom, they revealed a side of themselves I never knew existed, a side that, even now, a decade later, still haunts me. I stepped out of my room and made my way toward my parents' bedroom. My heart raced as I took a deep breath and turned the handle, bracing myself for the worst. The room was empty. After the initial shock, the realization hit me. These houses aren't real. They're constructed like video game levels, just enough detail where it's needed, but empty and hollow where no one is supposed to go. I stumbled backwards, falling to the floor, and crawled back to my bedroom and shutting the door, staying there the entire day, trying to process what I had just uncovered. As night fell, I decided to try one last thing, hoping the issue was confined to my friend's house and mine. I quietly climbed out of my window, but as I dropped to the ground, I sliced my leg in the process. Ignoring the pain, I moved toward a neighbor's house. Unlike that night at my friend's place, the moonlight was hidden behind thick clouds, making it difficult for me to see. I snuck into the backyard and crept toward a window. Peeking inside, I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black. But then a violent crack of thunder lit up the sky, giving me just enough light to glimpse the Woods family. All 5 of them, including their 6-month-old baby, were standing there in the dark, completely motionless. No TV, no lights, nothing. Just standing, frozen in place. You can image yourself being in a pitch-black room, doing nothing, not even breathing. That's what I saw in those brief seconds, before the darkness swallowed them up again. Gathering myself, I moved closer to the glass, desperate for another look. Just then, another crack of thunder split the sky, and in that flash of light, I saw Carol Wood's rotten, blue, smiling face, pressed up against the glass, staring directly at me. My lungs expelled all remaining air from them. As I started to run towards my house, the skies cracked open and bled water. I opened the door, climbed up the stairs. While my damaged leg was generating an excruciating pain, I skipped past my room and ran straight for the attic, where I'm currently writing this from. It all makes sense now. Why my town isn't on any maps, why I'm homeschooled, why we never visit other people, why we never go into public buildings, and why I'm locked out of half my own house. None of these things exist. But why? Am I even real? As I'm writing this, bleeding out, I know it won't be long before I'm found, either by my bloody trail or the open front door behind me. I'm hoping you're real because I'm all alone and freezing. And for the love of God, if such entity exists, I hope by the time I'm found by whatever these creature actors are, I'll be dead. As I look around, the attic is empty. I'm freezing. Just when you thought it couldn't get any scarier, let me introduce you to the next nightmare. We took a detour to an abandoned ski resort. Now I'm the only one left. I wasn't going to write this. I mean, who would even believe me? But it's been a week since I got home, and I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me. Maybe sharing this will help. Or maybe I'm just hoping that if someone else reads this, they'll avoid the mistake we made. It was supposed to be a quick road trip. Just me, my girlfriend Lisa, my best friend Ryan, his girlfriend Megan, and Danny, our goofy comic relief friend who kept us laughing even when we shouldn't have been. We were driving through the mountains for the weekend, a much-needed escape from city life. We didn't plan on going off-route, but you know how it is when you're with friends and feeling adventurous. When Danny suggested we take a detour to this old abandoned ski resort he'd heard about, we thought, why not? I wish we'd said no. It started off as a joke, all of us piling out of the car and into the snow, making ghost sounds as we approached the rundown resort. The place looked like it had been forgotten for decades. Windows boarded up, snow covering everything like a thick blanket, and this eerie stillness in the air. You could almost feel the weight of history there, like the place was holding on to its secrets. We should have turned back the moment we saw the first set of footprints, fresh ones, leading into the building. But we were curious. Hell, we were stupid. Ryan was the first to go in, shining his phone's flashlight into the darkness. Come on, guys, it's just an old building. He laughed, stepping inside. One by one, we followed. The inside was even worse. Dust coated everything. The walls were lined with faded photographs of people who probably hadn't been seen in years. There were some half-burnt candles in the lobby, like someone had been there recently. And that's when it hit us. Someone might still be here. We heard the first noise an hour later. It was just a shuffle at first, like someone dragging their feet across the wooden floor upstairs. Danny joked that it was a raccoon or something. But then we heard it again, louder this time. Lisa gripped my arm, and we all stopped laughing. Something felt off, like we were being watched. I think we should leave, Megan said, her voice shaky. For the first time that night, we all agreed on something. We turned to head back to the car, but when we stepped outside, our hearts sank. The car wouldn't start. Ryan checked the engine. Someone had ripped out wires. Who the hell would do that in the middle of nowhere? We were trapped. We decided to spend the night in the lodge. It was better than freezing in the car, right? We found a room with old mattresses and tried to make ourselves comfortable. We barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound that will haunt me forever. Footsteps. But this time, they were closer, right outside the door. Ryan, always the brave one, stood up and opened it, shining his flashlight into the hall. Nothing, just empty, creaky floorboards. But then we noticed it. Megan was gone. At first, we thought she'd just wandered off, maybe gone to the bathroom or to get some air. We searched the whole lodge, no sign of her. Lisa started crying, but Ryan, he was in denial. She's fine. Maybe she went back to the car, but deep down, we all knew something was wrong. The next day, we split up to look for her. Ryan and I went deeper into the woods behind the lodge, while Danny and Lisa stayed behind to check the lodge again. That's when we found it, a small wooden shed, hidden behind snow-covered trees. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, we found Megan's scarf. It was tied to a chair, along with other signs of struggle, blood. But no Megan. I looked at Ryan, and for the first time in my life, I saw true fear in his eyes. We raced back to the lodge, but when we got there, Danny was gone too. Lisa was hysterical, saying he'd gone to check the basement and never came back. We ran downstairs, but the basement was empty, except for an old diary we found in a pile of rubble. I'll never forget what was inside that diary. It belonged to the caretaker of the lodge from the 1960s. He wrote about strange disappearances, sacrifices, and a dark entity that the lodge was built to contain. The final entry said, "The ritual must continue. If it stops, it will come for us all." That's when the lights went out. In the pitch black, I heard Ryan scream. I felt Lisa grab my arm, and we ran, blindly, desperately, through the hallways. I don't even remember how we got out, but when we finally burst through the front doors into the freezing night air, Ryan was nowhere to be found. It was just me and Lisa. We made it back to the car. Don't ask me how. The wires were still cut, but somehow the engine roared to life. We drove. We didn't speak, just kept driving, faster than I've ever driven in my life, until we reached the nearest town. I don't even know how much time had passed. The police never found Ryan, Danny, or Megan. They searched the lodge, but there was no trace of them, or the diary. They called it a tragic accident, but I know better. Something in that lodge was waiting for us, something ancient, and I have this horrible feeling that it's not done with me yet. Lisa hasn't spoken since we got home. She just sits there, staring at nothing, like she's still trapped in that place. And me? Every time I close my eyes, I hear footsteps outside my door. I don't know how much time I have left. Think that was the worst of it? Oh no, the real terror is just beginning. Every other person at this party sees and hears a man named Lucas, but I don't. You might be shouting, "They're just pranking you, dude." That was what I thought when I first arrived. 1 hour later, I'm boxed in an ensuite with nothing at my disposal but weak phone reception and weaker ideas. I'll make this post brief, as I very much doubt I have a lot of time before the bathroom door parts with the frame, before the formless man makes his way in here. I've already seen him do things that defy explanation. I'm praying that one of you knows how to save me. Please. Aston. Jack joyously announced, greeting me at the door with open arms. He was the only person I knew at the party, but most of the faces in that common room were familiar. I joined a tightly packed cluster of students by the kitchen counter. A circle of 10 people once Jack and I had joined the group. 10 people to my eyes anyway. I know that because I counted each of us again, and again. I wanted to ensure that I hadn't lost my mind after Jack introduced an invisible 11th person wedged between Alexandra and Tegan. "And that's Lucas," he said. Still, after 20 or 30 minutes of conversation, I'd forgotten about my friend's gesture towards the empty spot, dismissed it as an odd moment, and I summoned the courage to make conversation with Tegan. "So why did you choose law?" I asked her. Tegan smiled. "Overbearing parents. Dad said I'd be putting my brain to waste if I were to take journalism, but I'm not planning on becoming a lawyer, so I'd call this a bigger waste of time." "Shit," I said. "That sucks." She shrugged. "What about you?" I asked the other girl. Alex answered, "Well, unlike Teagues, I do want to be a lawyer, but, my story's boring. You should hear why Lucas has taken this course." Then the other visible people in the circle all turned to face that gap between Alexandra and Tegan. Once more, I was left dumbfounded. Sure, I'm aware that we're all still young and immature. Everyone at this party is a first-year university student, after all. But we hardly know each other. This is a socializing event for freshers. A mixer. Whatever you want to call it. And I doubt that so many people would be this cruel. Why would a group of 50-something law students collaborate to torment at random a stranger named Aston? It's not as if I've done anything to warrant such mistreatment. We've only been studying here for a little over a month, and I've been sitting quietly in lectures. Those were the thoughts coursing through my mind in a simultaneous jumble as the other visible folk listened to a silent story. Listened and laughed as an unseen person told them something. Something that they all heard, but I did not. "It cracks me up," Jack whispered to me as members of the group had a one-way conversation with air. I nodded my head slowly, unsure as to what I should say. I must have turned a ghostly shade because my friend frowned at me. "You all right, man?" he asked. "You're usually a bit cheerier than this. Too much pre-drinking before we arrived?" I cleared my throat, speaking quietly whilst the others communed with the ghost. "I don't understand this Lucas thing. Is it a game?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? Fucking hell, Aston. You really are wasted. Maybe have a glass of water or something, pal." Then all eyes in the circle turned to me. There followed an awkward pause, and Tegan started to match Jack's frown. "You okay, Aston?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." Tegan nodded, then she and a few others turned back to the Lucas-shaped hole, the missing link in the chain. A couple of seconds later, those heads had returned to face me, as if waiting for my response. Several members of the circle were scowling at me. "Why are you ignoring him?" a student named Colin asked. "Lucas asked you a question, Aston." I tugged at my shirt, feeling my perspiring neck start to redden. The fabric was coarse, but fear was the thing that had slithered under my collar, irritated my skin. This wasn't social anxiety. There was something entirely wrong about the room's atmosphere. I'd felt that way before Jack even introduced me to Lucas. Felt off. Even the dozens of people who weren't standing in the kitchen, weren't making conversation with Lucas. seemed to converse and chortle with an erratic, unstable energy. I caught snippets of conversations that I shouldn't have been able to hear, but every voice in the common room was unbearably loud, and a key word kept spilling out of mouths from all corners of the party: shrine. Jack was right. I'm often an extroverted, sociable chap, but not tonight. Since showing up at this place, I've felt only the primal urge to run. Listen, guys, I eventually said whilst backing out of the circle, I just need some air. As I walked towards the door, I heard a couple of students chuckle at something the invisible, inaudible man had said. I'm sure you'll get your answer eventually, Colin whispered to thin air in an odd tone. Once outside, taking in the crisp autumnal breeze, I seriously considered going home. That was about 30 minutes ago, and I wish I'd just done it. Run for my life. That was my only chance. Things had changed when I re-entered the building. The eerie atmosphere had been polluted with something new. Everything was quiet, not quite silent, but hushed. And the thought of a practical joke, some grand conspiracy to humiliate me, returned to my mind. The possibility that everybody was laughing at me. That would have been simpler. Just some light hazing. But I returned to find the 50 or so party guests clumped together, all facing a white wall at one side of the large room, a wall with nothing at all displayed upon it. Jack beckoned me over before lifting a finger to his lips. What's happening now? I whispered. Just watch the film, Jack quietly replied with a heavy whisper. But there was no film, only that empty wall which had transfixed every person in the common room. Chest thumping, I noted that Alexandra, a few rows ahead, was facing the wrong way and twitching vigorously. Her nostrils bled, but that wasn't why I moaned in terror. It was the gunk oozing from her eye sockets. Not blood, but lumpy waves of pinkish-gray wrapping around her eyeballs and spilling down her cheeks, as if Alexandra's very brain were itching to escape from her skull. It's not that, I lied to myself, mouth half open in some state of paralysis. Then I began to croak. What the fuck is? A hand slapped against my lips, clamping them tightly together, and I turned to find Jack silencing me, though he still looked at the wall ahead. Still sobbed and sniffled with joy as he and dozens of others watched an imaginary film at the front of the room. I released a muffled gasp as I noted the trickles of gray spilling from his own orifices. Lucas wants quiet, Jack whispered. I was too frightened to move. Too frightened of what the hypnotized members of the crowd might do to me. Frightened of my own innards fleeing from my body. Then, after half an hour of watching nothing, there came a new horror from the front of the crowd. Directly ahead of me, in the front row of the audience, two side-by-side students crumpled to the ground, their bones shattered. Bodies imploded, the sounds of crunching and splashing. I don't know how else to describe whatever the fuck I saw. A specter scrunched their very skeletons inwards like balls of paper. And then the same happened to two audience members in the second row. The third followed. Something was flattening bodies to create a path, parting the crowd and forming a direct line towards me. He asked you a question, Jack groaned. My friend had finally turned to face me. I ran towards the building's still ajar front door. Ran as fast as my legs would carry me, but it was no use. A gust slammed the door shut, and it wouldn't open, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how forcefully I tugged. I was trapped in the hallway. When the crunch of compressing carpet sounded behind me, I stopped rattling the door handle, stopped and turned to see recesses forming in the carpet, the shapes of loafers or misshapen feet. These were the only physical indicators I had seen of Lucas's existence, other than the trail of crumpled corpses and the supernatural door slam. But as he walked towards me, the man's form remained unseen, his voice remained unheard, and I saw only the dozens of partygoers standing in the common room behind him, tightly huddled together, no longer watching Lucas' invisible film on the white wall. Their heads were turned to the right, were turned towards me. I dashed upstairs. There was no other way past the thing in the corridor, and no escaping out of the front door. I entered a hallway with dorm rooms on either side, and I hurriedly tried handle after handle. Stairs creaked below, one after the other, slowly. By some miracle, I eventually found an unlocked room, so I scurried inside and locked the door behind me. That didn't feel safe enough, of course. I locked myself in the ensuite for good measure. I don't know what Lucas asked. Don't know what Lucas might be. All I know is that he's still out there, either searching or waiting, and I need help before he finds me. I think death would be more merciful than hearing Lucas's question, than seeing his face. If that sent chills down your spine, then brace yourself for what's coming next. I thought I was alone in my apartment until I found someone else's belongings. I moved into my first apartment a few months ago, excited to finally have my own space. It was a modest one-bedroom in a quiet building, and I loved the peace it offered. I quickly settled into my routine, enjoying the independence and solitude. One night, after a long day at work, I returned home and immediately noticed something felt off. My front door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I'd forgotten in my rush to leave. I pushed the door open, calling out, "Hello," just in case I had a visitor. No response. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, and went about my evening. I noticed nothing seemed out of place, so I put it out of my mind and went to bed. The next day, I got home late again. As I entered, I felt a chill in the air and again noticed the front door was ajar. My heart raced as I cautiously stepped inside. This time, I glanced around and my heart sank when I saw a pair of shoes by the door, shoes that didn't belong to me. I froze, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I considered calling the police, but decided to check things out first. I moved silently through the living room and into the bedroom, but everything seemed untouched. The shoes were the only sign that someone had been in my apartment. I quickly went back to the door, locked it, and called my best friend, Jess. I explained what happened, and she urged me to stay somewhere else for the night. But I didn't want to seem scared, so I brushed it off and insisted I'd be fine. The next day, I took off work, still shaken. I didn't want to be alone. I spent the day at Jess's place, but by the evening, I decided to return to my apartment. I needed to confront whatever was happening. When I entered, the first thing I noticed was that the shoes were gone. I felt a mix of relief and unease. I locked the door and spent the night on edge, jumping at every sound. The following days were more of the same. Every time I came home, the door was ajar, and there were new items that didn't belong to me. A jacket, a half-empty soda can, a set of keys. Each time, I'd lock the door behind me and wondered who was entering my apartment while I was gone. I finally reached my breaking point and called my landlord. I explained the situation, and he assured me that no one had access to my apartment besides me. He suggested that I might be paranoid or imagining things. Desperate for answers, I decided to set up a camera in my living room while I was out. I left it recording and went to work, feeling a mix of dread and hope. When I got home, I rushed to check the footage. My blood ran cold as I watched. There, in the middle of my living room, was a shadowy figure, dressed in a dark hoodie, rifling through my things. I watched in horror as they casually opened my drawers, going through my personal belongings. I felt sick. I couldn't believe someone had been living in my space without me knowing. They were in and out, as if it were no big deal. I immediately called the police, and they came over to check things out. When they arrived, I played them the footage, and they assured me they would investigate. They also advised me to stay with friends or family until they found out who the intruder was. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my own apartment. I spent the next few nights at Jess's. The police kept me updated, but they had no leads, and I felt like I was losing my mind. Then, about a week later, I got a call from the police. They had apprehended someone, and they wanted me to come in for questioning. When I arrived at the station, I was shown a mugshot of a man I didn't recognize. They informed me that he had a history of breaking and entering. But what shook me the most was what they said next. He claimed he thought this was his apartment. He had been living in the building before I moved in, and for some reason, he believed he still had a right to enter. The officers assured me he wouldn't be able to get near me again, but I knew I'd never feel safe in that apartment again. I moved out a week later, and even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Sometimes I still hear noises at night, and I find myself looking over my shoulder more than I should. I learned that some things can hide in plain sight, and they can be scarier than any horror movie. You think you're ready for the next one? Well, let's see if you can handle it. The Road with No End. I would not consider myself a stupid person in any sense of the word, but I, like every person, am prone to stupid moments. That's why I decided not to go to school, but instead tried to start my own business, in which I would sell my own clothing brand that I was so sure was going to make me millions. It didn't last more than 4 months. Now I'm stuck in my shitty one-bedroom apartment with almost 1,000 t-shirts that I am too embarrassed to tell you what they actually say. With nothing else going on in I just started looking for any job I could. But no one seemed to like the gap in the resume, so I had no offers. None. 0. Except for one. A weird sketch Indeed ad that simply said, driver. It provided no information besides that, which I honestly didn't think was possible for there to be so little on Indeed. But here it was. I assumed it was for a taxi driver or a delivery driver. I was more than confident I could do that. I'd been driving since I was 15, so how hard could it be? With really nothing else to lose, I figured at the worst they would try to rob me. Unless they wanted my clothes, they weren't getting much. When they did ask if I wanted the job, I just took it. Then I was told to meet the guy on the edge of town tonight. I asked what if I was busy, and he just responded, then no job. Well, shit, guess I had no other choice. I don't know what I expected, but it definitely wasn't one dude standing next to a van. Great, I thought I'm gonna get robbed, murdered, or kidnapped. You Colton? Said the shaggy-looking man with scruffy-looking brown hair and beard. He reeked of weed. Yep, that's me, I thought. Just get it over with, man. You're gonna be driving this van down that road. He pointed off to the left. Okay, where I'm driving it to? You'll know when you see it. Okay, well, you didn't really explain much about the job. I mean, I don't even know what the pay is. It ain't much, but I figure if you responded that you must really need money, I mean, you come out here in the middle of the night to meet a stranger with no prior information. He was right. Well, you haven't told me much. Am I delivering drugs? Why in the hell would I post a drug-running job on fucking Indeed? That's fair. You ask one more question, I'm revoking the offer, so either take these keys and get in the van or get out of my face. Remember how I said prone to stupid decisions? This was one of them. I took the keys and got in the van. God, it smelt bad trying to grab the crank to roll down the window. But it didn't work. Oh, this is fun, I said, already regretting my choices. I checked what else was wrong with the van. The AC didn't work, but the heater did. Oh, cool. I needed that in the middle of the summer. The windshield wipers worked, but no fluid. The back seat had been torn out, and there was a gross-looking mattress in their place. As well as a duffel bag, I opened to check its contents, fully expecting the drugs to be in it. But instead, it had a couple of pairs of clothes weirdly in my size, some bottled water, and snack bars, as well as a flare gun and a med kit. I went back to checking the van. You know what did work. The radio, except it was stuck on one channel that only played Christian music. No offense to anyone who follows that religion and all, but I was not listening to that. I shut off the radio and put music on my phone. I looked over at the man, but he was gone. Was I really about to do this? I told myself. I guess I was, because I put the van into drive. I never got used to the feeling of driving at night, especially on country roads. As soon as you leave the city limits, you become suddenly aware of how dark nighttime is. The further you drive, the more and more the anxiety sets in. This was one road with no lines to keep you on one side. So I drove in the middle of the road until I saw someone coming on the left. Another fun thing about the road was just how bad it needed to be redone. It felt like I had to dodge a pothole every 40 feet or so. After driving for what felt like forever, but turned out to only be 43 minutes, I came on my first building, a small gas station with one pump. Upon seeing it, I began wondering how the hell I was going to fill up the van. I looked down to see the gas gauge was still on full, so that meant either this thing got pretty good gas mileage, or that the gas gauge was also broken. I felt like it was the second one. I pulled over in hopes that it sold air fresheners. The smell only seemed to get worse as I drove. I was more than willing to spend what little money I had left on one. The place was extremely worn down. It only had one pump and no diesel nozzle. There were water stains running down the building, and a small breeze kept shaking a piece of the sheet metal roof. It clanked against it, and for a few short seconds I stood there listening. This was enough to annoy me, and I felt bad for any workers. I pulled the door open, but it got stuck against the concrete, and I heard someone from inside yell, "You're gonna have to shimmy through." I feel like that had to break some sort of law or safety violation. I slowly made my way through the gap. My jacket got stuck about halfway through, in which I then had to pull it off from the door in the process, ripping a small hole in the side. I looked over at the worker. He had his face buried in a book, and it seemed like he was trying to ignore me. "You sell air fresheners?" "Auto sections at the back of the store next to the medicine section." I took that as a yes. The air fresheners were $7 for one. Talk about overpricing. I knew I only had like $12 left in my account. My credit cards were maxed out, and I drained my savings, so I knew I had nothing to fall back on. I checked my bank app to make sure I had the money I thought I had. To my surprise, I had more. Finally, something good. I had a whole $23 that I was about to completely blow at this random gas station. Still unsure if I was even getting paid for this. Why was I still driving? I mean, really, there was no job security here. I still don't even know what I'm delivering, or if I am even delivering something. Was I this desperate? Just then, like he was reading my mind, I looked down to see a text from Charlie. Wait, who was Charlie? "Don't worry, kid, you're getting paid. You already have been." I went into my deposits to see that $9 had been put into my account a couple of minutes before I came to the gas station. The memo just said from Charlie. So Charlie was the man who gave me the van. I'd put that part together. I had so many questions. Where did I get his number? I mean, I don't remember exchanging numbers. I don't remember learning his name or making a contact with him. I know I didn't give him any banking info. My mind was racing. I tried texting him back, but it just said undelivered. You know what? Fuck it. I was still alive and getting paid, so I'm not asking any more questions. I picked up the air freshener and went to the counter. On the counter, I saw some chargers, so I picked up one that goes into the lighter port. I at least wanted my phone if I was going to be driving for God knows how long. "How much for these?" The man picked up the items and scanned them. $13.78. I fished in my pocket for my wallet and put my card in the reader. "So you're actually real," the man behind the counter said. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Don't worry about it," he said, shoving his face back in the book. What a weird interaction, I thought to myself on my way out. I got in the van and put up my new air fresheners. The man slapped the side of the van, startling me in the process. I opened the door to yell at him, but he cut me off. "Unless you pull into somewhere with people, stay in your damn car." He walked away before elaborating. I was half tempted to follow him, but I decided against it. I was back on the road. I decided to put on a YouTube video as I was getting sick of my music. It was a video of someone explaining the Waco siege, which I had already listened to a couple of times. But I liked the YouTuber, and he was slow between uploads. It got to the part where they accidentally lit the compound on fire. Just then, a large creature jumped out from the darkness, bailing in front of the van. I tried to swerve so as not to hit it, but I wasn't quick enough. The van collided with the creature, smacking it with the front before it proceeded to roll over the top. I slammed on my brakes, stopping to catch my breath. My heart was pounding in my chest. I took a second breath and got out to inspect the damages on both the van and whatever I hit. The van was fine, not even a scratch on it. What a tank. The animal was not fine. It was a deer. One of its antlers broke off in the impact, and its face did not seem to enjoy the asphalt. There was a small trail of blood where it skidded across the road. One of its legs was broken and was sticking in the wrong direction. Oh shit, that thing is dead. I ate my words as I heard them huff. Now I felt like it was my obligation to put it out of its misery. I found a big enough rock on the side of the road to crush its head. Shuffling over with the heavy thing, I raised it as far up as I could and dropped it. The thing came down with a splat. Blood shot up from it and splattered on my face. "Welp," I said, wiping the blood off my face onto my jacket. I had done my civil duty. At least that's what I thought before the damn deer started squirming. Oh no, I had made it worse. It kicked and jumped, trying to get its head out from underneath the rock. I sat dumbfounded, trying to figure out if I should smash it with another rock or help it get the rock off. But just then, it stopped. I was thankful as it finally died. I ate my words again. The thing planted its 3 working legs. As it did, the 4th leg began to crack back into place. The bones crunched multiple times, and suddenly the leg was planted with the other 3. What the? The deer lifted its head, and the rock easily fell out of its place. It sat up and stared at me. Half of its face was scrapped from the asphalt. The other half flattened inward. There was blood and revealed bone. Its lower mouth hung halfway off, and its brain was revealed to the fresh air. In no world should it have been alive. It looked pissed in a way animals should not be able to show. The deer started its charge for me, its broken jaw swaying as it did. I turned around to make my run back toward the van, but the deer was much faster than me. I felt its remaining antler tear into my clothes and then into my back, knocking me to the ground and standing in front of me, now ready to make its second charge. I was able to roll out of the way this time. I pushed myself forward into the driver's seat and pressed the gas pedal as hard as I could. But since it was still in park, I didn't move. The deer rammed into the side, shaking the whole van. I put it into drive and peeled out of there. My adrenaline finally started to wear off, and I was very aware of my injuries, not only my back, but my knee and hands, which I scraped during my fall. Once I felt I was far enough down the road, I pulled over. Using one of the van's side mirrors, I did my best to examine my injuries. The 2 scratches on my lower back seemed to not be serious, but the puncture wound in my shoulder was bleeding really bad. I called 911 to get an ambulance, but the call wouldn't go through. It just kept failing. I knew I was going to have to drive myself to a hospital, and since I didn't want to die of blood loss, I saw one option. This was my first time doing stitches, so my solution was, well, I ended up on a WikiHow link, which as I'm typing this, I realize was another stupid moment. I lacked most of the tools they used, so I had to just follow it as best I could. I took a needle and thread from the med kit and went at it. After poking the needle in my skin for the first time, I realized how fucking painful it was. I grabbed my shirt and rolled it up so I had something to bite onto and went through several painstaking minutes of stitching. By the end of it, all I wanted was to get blackout drunk. I applied some of the first aid cream, which was for minor cuts and scrapes and scratches over my wound. Probably wouldn't help much, but better than nothing. Then slapping a gauze and some medical tape on it. If you're wondering how I stitched the back of my shoulder in the dark, side mirror and dome light from the van, I won't elaborate further. I decided my temporary sketchy job wasn't worth my life and started the 2-hour drive back towards town. I made my way around a bend in the road and I was back in the same place I just stitched myself in. What the hell? I thought it was the same place. I flipped the van around and drove again in the opposite direction. Turned around again in the same place. I tried again and again and again, but I kept ending up in the exact same place. Even getting out a couple of times to find my blood on the road. I once again received a text. It was from Charlie. Keep driving. I texted him back, asking who the hell he was and what kind of mind trick he was playing. But every text I sent didn't go through. I tried calling 911 again. I tried texting. I tried calling a friend, my old coworker, and my dad. No call or text would go through. I tried Insta. I tried Snapchat and Facebook. Any app that would allow me to send a text. I tried even leaving comments on YouTube videos. I could use these apps, but I in no way could interact with others. Once again, I received another message from Charlie. Keep driving. I accepted my defeat. I couldn't drive back toward town, and I couldn't contact anyone for help. This felt like the only option. So I got back in the van and started back on the road. I don't know what Charlie was, but he somehow was keeping me on this road, and he wasn't allowing me to talk to anyone I knew. But in a cruel twist of fate, I would later find out that I have one way to contact the outside world. Reddit. I can post as freely as I want on Reddit. I know that sounds stupid as hell, but it doesn't matter anyway. There is no way for anyone to even come help me, and I'm not revealing how to get to me. I kept driving. I'd been on the road for almost 8 hours when I saw the diner. I pulled over and made my way inside. An older woman greeted me, sitting me down in a booth and handing me a menu. "I'll be back to take your order." There was one other customer in the place. He looked over at me before standing up from his table and making his way towards me. "Are you real or one of them?" he asked, sitting down across from me. "One of them? One of the things from the road." "I don't know what that means. I can tell you're not one of them. He got you too, didn't he? That fucker Charlie." "You know him?" "Homeless-looking dude. Had you come to the edge of town in the promise of riches untold, all you had to do was drive." I didn't want to admit he tricked me with a lot less than untold riches. "Yeah, something like that. There's no way back, no way to call for help. How long have you been driving?" 8 hours, I think." "You're pretty new still. Wait, shh, she's coming." The waitress came back to the table. "You two ready to order?" She didn't seem to care that there was someone else at the table with me now. "Cheeseburger's fine," the man said. "I'll do the same." She walked off. "Like I was saying, you're pretty new still. You wouldn't believe the shit I've seen, man. Giant worms jumping over the roads, houses that stand up from out of the ground to chase you, hitchhikers that disintegrate into frogs when you pick them up." You know that sounds insane, right? If it was unbelievable, you wouldn't be listening still. So I'm guessing you've seen something that you're still on the fence about. I looked down at the table and whispered, "Zombie deer." I still didn't know if the deer was paranormal or just a freak of nature, but he was right. It was unexplainable at the very least. The waitress came back with our food. She stared upwards at the ceiling as if she was trying to avoid eye contact. She was listening in on us, somehow I knew that. We both gobbled it up and not a word was exchanged. It wasn't until we both left the building that he spoke up again. 9 weeks. What? I've been on the road for 9 weeks. Jesus, and you have no idea how to get off, so that means I'm stuck. Yeah, you're stuck, but I got an idea. What's that? Let's go drive the road together. Safer in numbers, you know? Hell no, man, I don't know if I even believe you for one. And if I did decide you're telling the truth, what's to say you're not something the road conjured up to trick me? Yeah, you bring up a good point. Look, man, since you're probably gonna die. What the fuck, man? Let me finish. Since you're probably gonna die, I wish you the best of luck. With that, he turned around, got in his car, and sped out of the parking lot. All while I sat there trying to figure out my next move. I knew something was wrong. I knew somehow I was stuck on the road, but I knew nothing else. If I was to believe that man, I was gonna see some weird shit. I believed him. I don't know why, but I did. I got back in the van, and I kept driving. The next fun thing I learned about the road is that the sun never comes up. In my 11 days of driving, I haven't seen the sun once. Unless I was somehow sleeping at the perfect time to miss all the sunlight, but that doesn't seem right. I never was a morning person, and I never was a people person, but damn, I was missing both of those. It makes you realize how much you took for granted showers and hot food. I didn't get to finish my thought before the van was sent off the side of the road, causing it and me to tumble my head smack on the steering wheel, and I blacked out for a second. The van lay on its driver's side. I was hanging slightly above the window. I reached over to unbuckle myself, falling directly into the window. My whole body felt heavy. My poor stitch job showed. Blood trickled from my back and from a newly formed scratch on my forehead. I didn't have any time to worry about that. Whatever knocked the van off the road got closer now. I could hear its heavy steps moving through a nearby brush. I tried to push myself up, but new injuries began to present themselves. My ribs ached, and I couldn't put any weight on my leg. I pulled myself using the armrest on the driver's side. I stood using my good leg to hold myself up, reaching for the passenger side door, but the thing dented the door inward. No matter how hard I tried, it wasn't opening. All while it got closer. I tried the window, but of course, it wouldn't roll down. An arm crashed through the front window, piercing the seat behind me. I had to duck down, forcing myself between the front seats into the back of the van. Pain shot through my body as I crawled through. The mattress had been knocked out of its place, forcing me to crawl under it. The monster was away from the window, and I could hear it scratching the car to my right. I lay in place, hoping it didn't know where I was. Its arm pierced through the side just above me. I crawled quicker towards the back window. Relief washed over me upon seeing the glass was already broken. I made my way through it, and I finally saw outside the van. Forcing myself up through the gap, feeling how ruined my leg was, I placed all my weight on my other leg, trying to move as fast as I could. I turned to see the monster's arm was still stuck inside the van. It tried harder and harder to pull its arm out. I used my opportunity to put as much distance as I could between us. The monster yanked, pulling its arm from the van before screeching into the air. It stared at me with dark black eyes and pale skin. It walked on 2 legs and had 4 arms. One of the arms lay flat, unmoving, the same one it pulled from the van. It clasped its incredibly sharp teeth together before running towards me. It was so much faster, there was no way I could move quickly enough. It ran with its working arms in the air as it tried to come for me. It was bloated, wearing pants and a jacket. It was human enough. I was on the road before my good leg gave out. I collapsed upon it. I turned my head to see. It standing feet from me, still screaming, but it stopped right in front of me, staring at the sky. For the first time since I started on the road, the sun was rising. The monster screeched one more time before turning around and running from the road into some brush. Soon, it was far from my sight. I wasn't going to wait around for it to come finish the job. I hobbled down the road for a mile or so, which in my current condition took much longer than it should have. From behind, I heard the noise of what sounded like a metal clacking together. When it got closer, I was able to figure out it was a car. It came right towards me, and I prepared myself for whatever else the road was going to throw at me. The vehicle pulled over, and a familiar face stepped out. The same man from the diner. "Holy shit, you're alive," he yelled at me. I said nothing back, just hobbled over to the car, opened the passenger door, and got in. He nodded and got into the driver's seat. We drove for 10 minutes before either of us said a word. "I saw your van and just assumed whatever did that got you. You left the diner before me." "Yeah, I stopped a little down the road and waited for you to pass. I've been following you since." Eventually, we came to a clearing just a bit further down the road, and he took a moment to properly assess my injuries. He told me my stitch job was utter shit and stitched it up properly. He then took to my leg, telling me it wasn't that bad, and made me a makeshift cast out of some foam and cardboard. He placed a bandage over my forehead, and as for my ribs, there wasn't anything he could do. We took the time to finally introduce ourselves. This was Ted Villack, a 33-year-old self-proclaimed doomsday prepper. The knowledge he gained in preparation for the end times came in handy, but he was kinda in the nicest way possible, an insane conspiracy theorist who thought our whole journey on the road was manufactured by aliens to test the limits of human capability. I didn't care about that. He could ramble about it all day. I was just happy to be around someone. For now, that's all I got. I'm stuck on this road, and no one's gonna come and help me. At least I have company. I welcome any theories about what's going on here, and I'll let you all know if anything else interesting happens. That last story was just a warm-up. The real horror is right around the corner. She likes to play. There will be several nights of games. Well, you know what they say, having isn't nearly as good as wanting. I don't see any harm in getting straight to the point. I have nothing to lose, and I'm only 20. Probably won't make it to 21. Heh, that's just a joke. Don't worry about me. I dunno. I'm kinda scattered right now. I'm a student at Brookwood Wessenheiser Community College in Timber Fall, Pennsylvania. Smallest town in the state, you have to zoom in so close to find it on Google Maps that you'll forget what you were doing by the time the words appear. And it doesn't have any universities. The Big BW has no dorms, but there's an apartment neighborhood across the street, mainly for student housing. You don't have to be one to get an apartment, but good luck living around the noise and shenanigans if you aren't part of the party. And I live there. I'd bounced around a few summer jobs for a couple years after high school to afford it and the college tuition since my parents couldn't help. We were pretty poor, but finally I had a job I could start to grow from. The lords and ladies treat the neighborhood like a gigantic dormitory. We have a fake fraternity, and they have a fake sorority. Of course, being community college kids, we had no idea how those real things were supposed to work. So, they just treat the two groups like clubs. No big deal. No heavy hazing, no bullying, just an initiation, and then you're in. I don't know what the women do, but the guys keep changing it up every few new students. The current thing gets old, or someone comes up with some new stupid thing, or oops, the guy who was in charge of the old thing got arrested for selling drugs. Haha, we don't talk about that. You can't prove we know anything. Look, a monkey. Zoom. I didn't have to worry. I was new, had only been there a month, and had no ties to the old things. I'd been talking to the guys about trying to join their frat for a while, and it seemed they'd finally come up with a new initiation. Boy, oh boy, there's nothing like being the guinea pig for a new way to scare the newbies. But if you don't join, you're basically never included in anything fun they do. And I figured the past initiations they described weren't that bad. There was occasional trespassing, but no vandalism, no destruction of property. The worst that had ever happened was having to climb up the side of someone's house in the neighborhood across the woods and put a jaunty top hat on their weather vane. Seriously, hoodlums? Up to no good? You coppers will have to arrest these guys for being goofballs before you ever pin them for anything serious. Drug Donnie was an outlier, and nobody liked him that much anyway, so no surprise to learn that he was not only doing lines every night, but also fattening his pockets handing it out, just to buy more. What a useless cycle for a complete loser. But enough about then. Here's now. The initiation was to simply enter a broken-down old shack of an abandoned house at the edge of the woods on the neighborhood across. Seriously, nobody knows what it's even called. We never go far enough to find an entrance sign, especially since we happen upon it from the backside. In the house was a lot of broken-down old furniture, broken wooden crates scattered here and there, and scratch marks on the walls, like from a knife or some other kind of tool. They spelled out rough letters, forming things like, "Stay and feed me," "Close your eyes and have a surprise," "Speak to me, baby." Yeah, literally a fucking emoji scratched into a rotting wooden wall like by some wild animal. It looked like a joke. Who wouldn't think so? Sounded like the ladies had been here and had done this, waiting for us guys to notice, so we'd get all interested and confused, and then they'd just come and laugh at us and confess, after watching us get all excited and mystified for a while. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what they do. I also don't know if it was one of them who did it, or if the person I'm thinking of is or was one of them. The sorority is as fake as the fraternity, but maybe there's something more to it. One of the messages, down in a corner full of cobwebs I had to stomp on to be able to read it, was actually some weird code-looking thing. The guys had found it, and I was supposed to go in the house alone, recording myself first person on my phone, find the code, and read it. Then stay in the house for an hour. Either nothing would happen and I got to leave, or something would happen, and I'd have to stay to see it out. I was in the corner, the darkest, rattiest-looking one, and raised my boot high. Thud. There was a message behind all the dust, scribbled by the same sharp thing, but slightly narrower and neater. HD 1T9773B. I read the code out loud slowly, smirking to myself. What a waste of time. Let me guess, some of you guys are here right now, and you're gonna make animal noises and scare me? Why would I scare you? Whispered a sultry voice behind me. I jumped a foot and turned around. The window on the other side of the room now shone with a blue light, as though the full moon were looking in through it, even though it hadn't been there seconds ago. But someone was standing in the way, blocking the light. It was the slim figure of a woman, her features barely visible, with soft dark pajamas and dark shoulder-length messy hair sort of fluttering there. I shivered. There was no breeze, nothing to move her. She stepped closer. "Stay with me and play," she whispered. "You're from the sorority," I said, trying to stay calm. No reason to be afraid. After all, there was a beautiful woman about my age, maybe a few years older, standing right in front of me. What was there to be afraid of? You're a part of them, right? Sorority? She giggled. I'm not interested. I'd rather make you a part of me. Okay, that one was creepy, not gonna lie, but I couldn't see any pockets on her clothes. No shit, it was nearly pitch black in the house, but I wasn't thinking straight, and I didn't see her concealing a weapon anywhere. Big brain time for me, huh? Plus, I was a 20-year-old college kid. Basically, an idiot. And when a 20-year-old single guy is faced with a sultry, comfortably dressed woman in the dark talking mysterious shit, running in fear isn't exactly the first response that comes to mind. Sue me for being a dude, okay? She came closer and closer until she was right on me. She slowly put her arms around me and whispered into my ear, "No resistance? No fighting? You could be a lot of fun." She kissed my cheek. I shivered again, and it wasn't quite from nervousness that time. But then, things become a blur. I feel like I must have sort of passed out, but there was a wonderful buzzing feeling in my head, and it happened so slowly. It was like that wonderful feeling you get from ASMR, but times 20, like I was getting massaged inside of my head. Finally, I woke up suddenly, as if I'd stood up in my sleep and then fallen backwards onto the bed, stiff as a board. Only this wasn't a bed. It was the floor of the falling-apart house, and it was early Saturday morning, dawn peeking through the open windows and the doorless frame in front of me. I was lucky. There were occasionally sightings of things like foxes and coyotes around here. We're pretty close to the country and farmlands, and I don't know how those kinds of animals deal with sleeping humans, but I'm just glad none of them found me. I felt sharply awake, but also tired, like I'd only slept half the night. Nevertheless, I found my phone a few feet away, battery dead. All I cared about in that moment was the video. The fucking video, dude, it had to be insane. I ran all the way back to the neighborhood. When I finally got it charged up enough to turn on, during which I was explaining the whole thing to the guys and why I hadn't come out all night, because they'd thought I was pranking them by acting like I'd gone missing, I played it. There were about 20 of us in all, not the whole neighborhood, thank God. So front row seating for my tiny Samsung Galaxy Ace wasn't really convenient, but we made it work. It captured everything, from the moment I walked in to that woman and her mysterious words. They all hooted and hollered and slapped me on the back when she held me and kissed my cheek, but they didn't seem to get what was going on or who she was. And then it got weird. There it was, that moment I couldn't remember, when everything became a senseless blur. She reached down and took my phone out of my hand, setting it gently on the ground. We were both visible in the recording for a moment. She reached out and touched my head with both hands, and my face seemed to droop with languor. She leaned forward and kissed me fully, and started walking me slowly backward until we were out of view. There was nothing but the soft sounds of her kisses, and small sighs from her, and some kind of strangling sound. Was that coming from me? Sort of high-pitched, like something was sucking the breath out of me from far away. The guys were all staring at the phone, dumbfounded. They kept watching until the video ended, and nothing any further out of the ordinary happened. In the end, the guys were laughing and clapping and slapping me on the back, declaring that I was way beyond a member of the frat now. Some of them thought I'd tricked them back somehow, but they weren't even mad. But I was the only one creeped out by it all. Yes, it had felt wonderful, but what the fuck had it been? Was she on some kind of heavy drug that just got into my system when she kissed me, just by breathing into my mouth? Was that possible? Had she done the thing that seemed kind of obvious? She had walked away from the phone after all, but I couldn't remember anything vivid. I wasn't sure. Should I have felt disgusted? Violated? Why would I, if I wasn't even sure she'd done anything more than holding and kissing me? I tried to put it out of my head. The whole day went by pretty smoothly, and I didn't have much to do. But the boys took me out to dinner that night at a buffet, and I have to admit, we were kind of rowdy. We had a corner to ourselves, and may have accidentally driven away a few people to different seats farther off. A waitress came by once with a resigned expression that said she thought she'd get yelled at and belittled, and opened her mouth, probably to ask us to quiet down. But it was the leader of the current group, Foxy, who saved the day. With a big smile and a wink at her, he reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a $50 bill, then handed it to her wordlessly. She turned red, opening and closing her mouth like a fish for a second, a flustered smile appearing and disappearing a few times. Then she nodded and walked away, presumably to tell her boss he had no idea what the hell the complaining customers were talking about. She'd only found a group of nice modern gentlemen in that corner eating half the buffet. Nothing to worry about. We soon left, separating to our cars, and got home without incident. But that night, last fucking night, it's Sunday morning right now. I'm scared out of my mind. Well, kinda. Should I be scared? How scared should I be? Maybe this is nothing. Am I overreacting? I should probably get back to the fucking story already. I fell asleep around midnight in my studio apartment. Nice, peaceful place. I even turned on a fan and some ASMR. But soon I woke up to the feeling of something caressing my cheek. I sat up in a terror, face to face with her. She lowered her hand from my face, smiling lovingly at me. She was squatted down next to my mattress, stroking my cheek with her fingertips, dressed in those soft, dark clothes again. I scrambled backwards off my mattress, and she giggled. As I stood up, the lights turned on, but not very brightly. There were half a dozen orange lamps spaced around my apartment on little wooden tables. Nothing else but my bed. The lamps on the tables, her, and no front door. In front of me, the room stretched a short distance, and then turned into a dark hallway going to the right. "Let's play," she whispered, standing up and approaching me. Her smile was less frightening and more seductive, more beautiful. In the better lighting, I could see that her pajamas were pitch black, and she was tanned. I would have guessed she was Brazilian. I'm not sure. And she was drop-dead gorgeous. She took my shoulders gently and kissed my cheek, running her lips down my face toward my neck, and I shivered, getting lost in the moment. She kissed me a few more times, lower, under the ear, lower. But then my senses returned, and I awkwardly jump-stepped to the side, almost losing my balance. My awareness came back, and as I turned toward her, she smiled at me, sticking her tongue out and wiggling it playfully. "Have more," she murmured, reaching for me. I turned and bolted toward the far side of the room and stopped at the entrance to the dark hallway. "What the fuck is this?" I said to her, turning to face her again. "I'm dreaming, right?" I know, I should have been way more freaked out. I seemed too calm and collected for what was going on, didn't I? But I've never been one to collapse into a blubbering mess over something terrifying. I either question it or I run, and I don't stumble and trip over all that pesky air. Thanks, horror movies. "Absolutely not," she whispered. "I don't make people dream. I take dreams from them. I'm better than any dream, Cam. My games are more real, more fun, than anything you could hope to see in your boring little outside world life. And if I win, I get to have more of you." Her eyes twinkled. "Or you could just give in right now and let me feed now. Do you like the sound of that, Cam?" she asked softly, staring at me with doe eyes. "Do you like the thought of standing there defenseless and letting me feed on you, not fighting me, not stopping me, just letting me take more and more?" "The fuck are you talking?" But I couldn't finish. She pounced, running at me full speed, and I had to turn and run too. The hallway wasn't as long as I thought. Lucky I had my arms out in front of me. Seconds later, my hand slammed into another wall, and my arms sort of crumpled, absorbing the impact not too painfully and stopping me from snapping my nose against the plaster. To my left was another hallway, with a dim orange light shining from another turn past it. I took the corner at a full run. I could see again. I went beyond it, turned right and ran past another lamp, and ended at a two-way intersection. The hall became a T, and there were more halls to the left and right. "You have 1 hour," her voice called from behind me. "If I don't pin you in 1 hour, you win the night." She was still running. I took the left turn, then a right at a three-way intersection, and went straight at a four-way. The entire building had become gigantic, a maze of short, dimly lamplit corridors. I was internally cursing, trying to convince myself she was lying, that it had to be a dream. It couldn't not be one, could it? Half of me really did want to stop. I was kind of excited at the prospect of just not resisting her, letting her approach me and kiss me again, the way she had last night. Whatever it had been so wonderful that it had fogged everything, and part of me wanted that feeling again. The wonderful buzz through my whole head, like feathers massaging my brain. In the end, red flags and common sense won. I kept running. Somehow I kept it up for what might have been more than a half hour. But eventually I came to a dead end, long after I'd stopped hearing her footsteps and laughter. I'm pretty sure she was going slow on purpose to let me gain some distance, enjoying her game of cat and mouse. The dead end was a small, widened rectangular block at the end of a corridor. From far away, I'd thought the left and right sides were more hallway turns, but they were just blank walls. A large, beautiful bed took up the space on the right. Big, white, and with fluffy, thick sheets. I heard her exhale softly behind me, and I whirled around to see her at the far end of the corridor. She came to me, and the hallway wasn't big enough for me to have a shot at slipping past. If I tried, she'd jump on me and pin me easy. "Go ahead, baby," she said softly. "Get in bed, and let's have a cuddle. Give up now. You played good. You tried hard. There's still 10 minutes, and you're trapped. No chance of getting out. Aren't you sleepy? Don't you want to lie down and have more kisses?" With nowhere to go, I backed up further into the room, away from the bed. She grinned at me and walked faster. I tried to slip around her once she was inside, but she grabbed me and wrestled me toward the bed, laughing. And I have to admit my resistance wasn't very strong anymore. She wrangled me into the bed easily, climbed on top of me, kissed me deeply, and the soothing darkness settled in like a blanket. The lamps went out. That buzzing feeling filled my head faster than before, spreading down toward my shoulders, filling my neck. It felt like it was even sending little barbs down into my chest. Whatever it was stronger than the first time, and it was wonderful. You'd think the law of diminishing returns would apply to future occurrences, but nope. It was the opposite. For at least a couple hours, I felt heightened euphoria all over. I was a little more aware of the whole thing. Time was a bit of a blur, but I could feel things more solidly and was more aware of my surroundings. And it just made the whole thing that much better. I could feel her lips on my face. I could feel her hair tickling my neck. I could feel her hands on my back, her soft sleeves like silky down against my skin. Finally, she was laying next to me in the bed in total darkness, the doorway gone and replaced with solid wall, no way out. She held me close, cuddling me, and we slept. I woke up just an hour ago in my own apartment, as exhausted as if I hadn't slept at all. The bed I woke up in was not my bed. It was the big white one with the fluffy sheets. The apartment had all my stuff still, but now there was a small wooden table by the door with a lamp on it. I got up and staggered to the table, examining the lamp up close. The table. I turned around and checked out the bed. I was too tired to think clearly. This could not be real. I stumbled to the kitchen sink and drank a few glasses of water and went to the bathroom to try and clean myself up and make sense of it all. I looked like I hadn't slept in a week, much less a day. My hair was ruffled and greasy, my face was pale, and there were dark circles under my eyes. And, there were light, glossy lip prints on my cheeks and neck. I squinted in confusion and licked my lips. They tasted sugary. They tasted like her. That sweet taste of her kiss. I hadn't even realized it had had a taste at all. I'd been so under her spell. I leaned closer and looked at my neck. It wasn't too visible, but I could just barely make out faint prints in the skin, like her fingers, as though she had grabbed my throat while kissing me. Was she being violent? Or just passionate? What could I do? What should I do? I don't know. Look, you guys will judge me, I know it, but at that moment I wanted to keep it all to myself. Look, maybe something happened and gave me a weird dream or a nightmare, if you could call it that. But at the end of the day, that was all it had been. A dream. I couldn't prove anything. It wasn't real like the first time. It couldn't have been real. She could not have actually entered my apartment, literally twisted the physical reality of the place like some dimensional warping demon, and then kissed me into a near coma in a queen-sized bed for real, right? So what good would it have done to tell any of the guys or try to talk to anyone with any real authority like a cop? Nobody could help. Was there even anything to help? I mean, dreams like that, they're common, right? That happens all the time, right? But you people, this is the perfect place to come clean. Nobody can track me down, so nobody can book me into a mental institution. You people will back me up, right? This is just some common thing that happens, isn't it? A harmless dream, and I should just keep quiet and enjoy it. I bet you'll agree with me. After all, I have zero way to escape it, so it has to be something good. My dream angel, making me feel heavenly while I sleep. I'm okay, right? I took a long shower and toweled off, stepping back out of the bathroom with it wrapped around my waist. With my eyes less bleary and feeling more awake and refreshed, I walked back into the main room. I had to check those things out again, figure out what was going on. The bed didn't have any tags on it or any logo, brand, or anything. Just blank and generic. The blankets, too. The table looked handmade. Nothing on it out of the ordinary, just some type of light tan wood and white painted legs. Small but strong and sturdy. The lamp was made of heavy dark brass, and the light bulb was shaped strangely, not round, but rather with a lot of angles, like some freaky badly rendered polygon. Switching it on, I found it to be kind of dim, not good for full lighting, but good enough to make a room feel cozy in the evening for binge watching your favorite show. After some thought, I unscrewed the light bulb. I peered at the top. Nothing there. I looked at the screw. No markings. I looked at the stem just above the conductor. You think you've heard the scariest part? Just wait until you hear this next story. Out of the frame rain battered the windows, the downpour relentless, filling the house with the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones. I liked the attic on days like this. It was quiet up there, tucked away from everything, a space filled with old keepsakes and forgotten things. But today, I wasn't just killing time. Something had been bothering me. It started last week when I was flipping through one of the old family albums. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just turning pages, drifting through birthdays, holidays, lazy summer days. Then I reached the section from when I would have been around 4 years old, and froze. Entire pages were empty. The photo corners were still there, neatly pressed into the yellowed pages, marking where the pictures used to be. But the photos themselves were gone, not shuffled, not misplaced, gone. At dinner that night I asked about it, keeping my tone casual. "Mom, do you know what happened to some of the old photos? The ones from when I was little?" Her hand froze over her plate. Just for a second. Then she smiled, too quick, too bright. "Oh, those? I probably took them out years ago for a project. Maybe they got lost." My father kept eating, silent as usual, but I noticed it. A flicker of something between them. A glance, fast and unreadable. And then it was gone, like it had never happened. I nodded, pretending to let it go, but the unease lingered. Why were those photos missing? The next afternoon, the rain still poured, and I found myself back in the attic. If those photos weren't in the album, they had to be here somewhere. I searched through old boxes, shifting dusty furniture aside, until I found a small wooden box hidden behind a trunk. The latch was rusted, and my hands shook as I pried it open. Inside were photographs, old, worn at the edges, slightly curled from age. I pulled one out, and the ground seemed to tilt beneath me. It was me, or at least a little girl who looked exactly like me. But the woman beside her wasn't my mom. She had wild, curly hair and soft, tired eyes. There was a warmth in her smile, a tenderness that made my chest ache, though I didn't understand why. She was holding the little girl's hand, my hand, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I turned the photo over. Written on the back in shaky handwriting was a single word: Lily. That wasn't my name. Heart pounding, I shuffled through the rest of the photos. The same woman, the same little girl. They were at a park, baking cookies, curled up on a couch with a book. There were no photos of my parents, the ones who had raised me. The knot in my stomach tightened. I spent hours at the library that evening, combing through old newspapers. When I finally found what I was looking for, the room seemed to shift around me, the walls closing in. Margaret Thompson found murdered, daughter Lily missing. The article detailed the brutal murder of Margaret Thompson in her home 12 years ago. Her 5-year-old daughter, Lily, had vanished without a trace. Authorities suspected kidnapping, but no suspects were ever found. A grainy photo accompanied the article, a photo of the missing girl. She had dark hair, wide, familiar eyes. My eyes. When I got home, the house felt different. The walls seemed to press in too close, and the air felt heavier than before, as though something had shifted while I was gone. I climbed the stairs slowly, my wet shoes squeaking against the hardwood floor. Every step felt heavier than the last. In my parents' bedroom, I searched through drawers and closets until I found another box tucked beneath their bed. Inside were more photographs, pictures of the woman from the attic, Margaret Thompson. and at the very bottom, folded carefully, was a newspaper clipping. Reward offered for information on missing girl. Printed in bold letters at the bottom was the name that had once been mine, Lily Thompson. The floor creaked behind me. I turned slowly, the weight of the truth crashing down on me all at once. Alice, the woman I had called Mom, stood in the doorway, her expression calm, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You weren't supposed to find that," she whispered. Behind her, Jack, the man I thought was my father, stepped into view, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He didn't look angry, just disappointed. For a moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the steady drip of rain against the windows. Then Alice smiled. It spread slowly, like a crack forming across a mask. "If you could barely handle that one, you might want to turn back now." Because the next story is even worse. Rain of the rain began innocently enough. It started as a light drizzle, barely noticeable as I stood on the side of the empty highway, thumb out, waiting for a ride. I'd been walking for hours, and the idea of finding shelter seemed as distant as the last car that passed me by. The sun had long disappeared behind thick, brooding clouds, leaving the world a muted shade of gray. Then the rain picked up. At first, I was just annoyed. My boots squelched with each step, the water creeping through the worn soles, chilling my feet. But as the rain fell harder, it became something else, something unnatural. Each drop hit the ground with a force far beyond what seemed possible. It felt more like tiny fists pummeling the earth, pounding the asphalt, pounding me. My skin tingled, the sharp sting of the rain biting through my jacket. I pulled my hood tight, trying to shield myself from the downpour, but the water seemed to find its way through every gap, soaking me to the bone. There was no place to hide, no shelter for miles, just me and the endless stretch of road. The wind howled through the trees, bending them as though they were made of rubber, and the air grew colder with every gust. I was alone. I trudged forward, hoping, praying that some car would come. But it was a dead road, just me and the rain. And then, out of nowhere, I saw headlights flicker far down the highway. Relief surged through me. I waved, stumbling into the road, barely able to make out the shape of the vehicle through the thick sheet of water. The car rolled up slowly, unnervingly slow, like it was sizing me up. When it stopped, the window slid down, and a voice, raspy and almost drowned out by the rain, called to me. "Need a ride?" I could barely see the driver, just the silhouette of someone behind the wheel, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to spend another second in that storm. I yanked the door open and collapsed into the passenger seat, drenched to the bone. The door shut with a heavy thud, muting the sound of the storm outside. "Thanks," I said, trying to get comfortable, but the air in the car felt wrong, thick, like the rain was still inside, heavy and damp. "No problem," the driver said, his voice strange, like he hadn't spoken in years. "This storm can swallow you whole." I glanced over at him, but the dim light of the dashboard only cast shadows over his face. His features seemed blurred, out of focus. I shook my head, wiping rain from my eyes, convinced the storm had just messed with my vision. "You don't see many people out here," I said, trying to make small talk, but there was something off about the air in the car. It felt too quiet inside, almost trapped. "No, the locals won't come out when it rains around the mountain," the driver answered. His tone slow and deliberate. I blinked. Can't blame them. "Where are you off to?" The driver let out a low chuckle, and I swore I saw his face shift in the dark, like it wasn't fixed in place. "The rain," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It has a way of getting into you. You're lucky I picked you up." My heart thudded in my chest. I stared out the window, watching the rain streak down in thick, unnatural lines, almost like it was crawling. The drops didn't fall like they should have. They slithered. And the sound of it, the endless drumming on the roof, it wasn't right either. It felt like it was talking to me, calling out in a language I couldn't understand. I glanced back at the driver. "What do you mean by getting into you?" He didn't answer. He just kept driving, but slower, as if the car was struggling to push through the storm. I watched the windshield wipers struggle against the rain, which seemed to fall harder now, like it wanted to punch through the glass. The inside of the car started to feel wrong. The windows fogged up, and the air felt thicker, wetter. I could taste the rain, even inside. I wiped at the window, but my hand came away wet, slick with condensation that felt too thick to be just water. His face was more visible now, but something was terribly wrong. His skin looked damp, swollen. His eyes were dull, as though the life had drained out of them. I gasped, pulling back against my seat. I could feel my breath quicken, my chest tightening. The rain wasn't just falling, it was everywhere, creeping through the seams of the car, soaking into my clothes even though I was inside. I glanced at my hands and they looked bloated, pale, like they'd been soaking in water for days. I looked down and gasped. The floor of the car was flooding, water rising up to my ankles, swirling thick and black. It was seeping in from everywhere, from the cracks in the windows, from the seams of the doors, from the driver himself. I looked over in horror as I realized what was happening. The driver wasn't just driving in the rain, he was the rain. His form shifted and twisted, his body becoming translucent, watery, his skin rippling like the surface of a pond. His eyes, empty sockets, stared through me as his mouth opened, releasing a choking, wet laugh. I screamed and shoved at the door, slamming my shoulder into it with everything I had. It burst open, and I tumbled out onto the soaked asphalt. I scrambled to my feet, but the rain was all around me, relentless, pounding. It felt alive, like it was pulling me down, trying to drag me into the road. I turned back, and the car, it wasn't there anymore. There was no car, no driver, only rain. The rain formed tendrils, thick ropes of water wrapping around my legs, pulling at me, dragging me down into the pooling water on the road. I gasped for air, clawing at the ground, my vision blurring as the rain pounded into my head, my chest suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Everything went wet and black. Suddenly, a loud blaring noise pierced through the fog of my mind, followed by a flash of blinding light. A car horn. I jolted awake, gasping for breath, my body stiff and unresponsive. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. My vision blurred, and the cold, biting rain stunned my skin. I blinked, struggling to focus. Headlights shone directly into my eyes, so bright they made my head pound. I was standing, frozen by the side of the road, soaked to the bone. My clothes clung to me like ice, my limbs numb. I had no idea how long I'd been standing there, completely unaware, just lost to the storm. A car had pulled up in front of me, its horn still reverberating through the rain-soaked air. I shuddered, barely able to move, my body shaking violently from the cold. My legs felt weak, like they hadn't moved in hours. I forced myself to take a breath, the air cutting into my lungs as I raised a trembling hand to shield my eyes from the harsh glare of the headlights. The driver's window rolled down, and a voice called out, sharp and impatient. "I've been honking for ages. Are you okay? Or do you have a death wish? Get in the car, man." I blinked hard, trying to make sense of the voice. My pulse raced, my mind struggling to catch up, still disoriented from whatever had just happened. I glanced down at myself, dripping wet, my fingers blue and stiff. I hadn't even noticed how cold I was until now, standing there like a statue, completely numb to everything. The driver leaned forward, a hint of concern slipping into his frustration. "You've been standing there like a zombie. You need help, or what?" I staggered forward, my legs shaky and unsteady. This car was different. The driver, his voice, he sounded real. Not like before. At least I hoped he was real. I hesitated for a second longer, then, shivering uncontrollably, I opened the door and climbed into the passenger seat. The warmth of the car hitting me like a shock to my system. As the door clicked shut, I sank into the seat, still dazed, still not fully sure of what had just happened to me. Thought you could breathe easy after that? Think again. The next story will leave you sleepless. The Haunting of Silence. I'm sharing my story in the hope that it may help those of you who are also haunted find peace. The trash bins in my apartment complex were tucked away in the courtyard, and I made my way toward them, guided only by the moon's silvery glow. The rustling wind through the trees and bushes, along with the faint hum of the city beyond the walls, was my only company. However, as I tossed the trash into the bin, those accompanying sounds abandoned me. In an instant, all sound disappeared, as if someone had pressed mute. My senses sharpened in the sudden, eerie silence. I glanced around. Nothing. I closed the bin and turned to head back, only to stop cold. Where moments before there had been empty space, a female figure now stood in the middle of my path. At first, I thought she was standing on her toes, her head tilted slightly, as though she were intently observing something. Then I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't touching the ground. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The clock on my nightstand showed I had overslept by nearly an hour. My usual phone alarm hadn't gone off. Panicking, I rushed out of the apartment and headed to the university, where my psychology class was about to start. Still shaken by the nightmare, I quietly slipped into the back of the auditorium and spotted my friends sitting to the right. I chose a seat in the far back on the left. I hadn't started working on the case study that was due the next day, so after class, I hurried to the library. As I rushed down the hallway, I heard my friends calling out to me, their voices filled with concern, asking if I was okay. But I couldn't afford to be distracted. I kept my head down, quickened my pace, and slipped away before they could catch up. I knew there were quiet spots in the back of the library where I could focus. However, time slipped away without any progress. My mind felt like a jumble of memories I couldn't piece together. I pulled out my phone several times, but put it back in my pocket without turning it on. Slowly, people left until I was alone, surrounded by empty desks, tall shelves, and creeping darkness. As I stared blankly at my laptop screen, I suddenly noticed an unnatural darkness tugging at the edge of my vision, pulling me back to reality. For a long moment, I kept my head turned toward the screen, my eyes glued to the shadow beside me. It was a dark figure swaying faintly, as if suspended by an invisible thread. Its legs hung limply, toes pointed downward, hovering just above the ground. My blood froze. I held my breath, paralyzed. Then the smell hit me, a piercing stench of rotten meat. I blinked. The shadow stretched its arms unnaturally long, reaching toward me. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my laptop and backpack. I ran, eyes down, refusing to face whatever loomed over me. That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom with my laptop, staring at endless internet videos, hoping to fall asleep. But sleep wouldn't come. I knew I had to face the dark hallway to get to the bathroom. Each step back toward my room felt like an eternity, my tunnel vision making me question who was in control of my body. Silently praying I was alone, I froze when a sickening snap echoed behind me. My eyes darted to the end of the hallway, and there she was, barely visible in the darkness. She hung there, legs dangling lifelessly. This time I didn't wake up, no matter how desperately I wanted to. My throat tightened, ready to ask why she could not let me go. But as if she could hear my thoughts, her black eyes swirled with rage and torment, and her mouth twisted into a grimace. Another snap echoed through the hallway as her neck stretched impossibly, a cruel mockery of her life. Then, with horrifying determination, she began to move toward me. Her body jerked forward, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings, feet scraping against the floor. I crashed into my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it with trembling hands. But the sounds didn't stop. What started as soft, tentative taps quickly escalated into thunderous pounding, as if an unseen force was violently slamming her body against the door, driven by mounting rage. Desperate, I pulled out my phone to call for help. What finally broke me wasn't the horrific knocking, but the notifications on my phone after turning it on. Dozens of missed calls and messages from friends and family. Condolences. It hit me like a relentless wave, crashing against the dam of emotions I had built to hold everything back. And that dam began to crack. The first sob broke free, a raw, guttural sound that surprised me. Must have been the first sound I had made in a while. I tried to fight back the tears, but the pounding on the door matched the racing of my heart, and another sob tore its way out. Then came another and another, until the floodgates burst open. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unrelenting, each drop carrying the weight of unexpressed grief, guilt, and regret. The guilt of not being there for her. The guilt of not realizing sooner how much pain she was in. The guilt of not telling her the things that truly mattered. I surrendered to the catharsis, each sob a release of the pain I had held inside. And when the tears finally ran dry, the pounding had ceased. Silence engulfed the room. Exhausted, I crawled into bed and drifted into the first deep sleep I'd had in a long time. Life returned to a quiet rhythm. Days passed uneventfully. The campus buzzed with its usual noise, and my friends stopped asking if I was okay. But every now and then, late at night, when the world was still, I'd hear it again. A faint tap, barely there, like a distant echo. It always came when I was on the edge of sleep, pulling me back to a place between waking and dreaming. Sometimes it was just a single creak, like old wood settling. I told myself it was nothing, the house, the wind, the natural sounds of the night. But in those moments, my heart would race, my breath would catch, and I'd stare at the ceiling, waiting, listening. The silence would return, stretching out like a long, dark road. But I knew it could happen again. Because forgiveness, it turns out, isn't a one-time thing. It's something I have to choose over and over each time the echoes return. And some nights, they do. If you think that sent chills down your spine, just wait for what's coming next. I was the one watching. I had always been afraid of being alone. I hated the dark. I hated the little noises and creaks that the house would make when I was little. Nobody thought I would ever move out and be on my own. And truthfully, I started to feel that way too. Until I found my small, cluttered apartment on the outskirts of town. The neighbors were scarce and quiet, but I didn't mind because it was in the good part of town. The apartment itself was, like I said, small, barely big enough to fit one person inside the kitchen, and the bedroom was the size of a walk-in closet. But I didn't care because it was mine and the rent was cheap. I worked as a secretary for an accounting firm, which doesn't pay too well, but the people there are kind and I've made friends with many of them. So, countless mindless days I would spend filled with work, running errands, and occasionally meeting my friends for drinks. It was boring and it was simple, and I loved it. Until I couldn't anymore. It was 4 months ago to the day. I was returning from the grocery store when I first felt it. That tingling, prickling sensation, like eyes boring into the back of my skull. I stopped mid-stride, glancing around the dimly lit street. It was empty, aside from a stray cat darting into the shadows. I shook it off, attributing it to fatigue and the coming darkness. Despite pulling myself together and moving on my own, I was still a good bit afraid when the night came. There were way too many possibilities, and not enough of me to fight them off. The store wasn't too far from my apartment, though, so I quickened my pace, and when I got home, the weird sensation had faded from my mind. But, over the next few days, the feeling grew. Subtle things began to shift. I would leave my keys on the kitchen counter, where I religiously left them in plain sight because I was prone to losing things, only to wake up the next morning and find them on the coffee table or stuck in the couch. My mail was shuffled, and some of it was opened, as though someone had rifled through it. I brushed it off and attributed it to my forgetfulness, but in the back of my mind I knew it wasn't me. At night, I heard faint creaks, footsteps, coming from the hallway. Each time I would check, the apartment was as still as ever. I began sleeping with a nightlight, and I definitely felt silly doing so, but it gave me some peace. I decided it was just the natural sounds of the apartment settling, but I lived on the bottom floor, and up until this point, my apartment didn't creak, and no one lived above me. One night, I caught a glimpse of something, or someone. I had gotten home later than usual, probably around 1 a.m. I fumbled for my keys at the door, and I just so happened to glance across the street and saw a figure, just standing there, unmoving, watching. I froze in place for a minute and just stared back at the person. I snapped out of it, and I turned the key, hurried inside, and slammed the door. By the time I had the courage to peek out the window, the figure was gone. I was officially scared. I stood there at the window for a while, and after not seeing anything or anyone strange, I retired to my room. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. Stress from work, too little sleep. But something had changed. A creeping presence had wormed its way into my thoughts. No matter where I went, I couldn't shake the sense that someone, or something, was always near. Paranoia gripped me like a vice. The feeling of being watched intensified until it was suffocating. The few neighbors I had now felt like enemies. I didn't know how they were getting in, or who was following me. I was scared to stay put, and too scared to leave. My once comfortable apartment now felt like a prison, each shadow harboring something unseen. One morning, after waking from a fitful sleep, I took my usual morning shower. I was washing the conditioner from my hair when I heard what sounded like the quiet resistance of fingers on damp glass. I froze in fear once again, my mind racing. My bathroom door creaks loudly from the rusty hinges, and I knew for certain nobody had opened it. I was the only one with the key to my apartment, and I always double-checked my locks. I stayed stuck in the shower until the water turned cold, body paralyzed, the whole time listening intently for any sound of another presence in there with me. I couldn't see anyone through the shower curtain when I finally found the courage to open my eyes. I slowly turned off the water and reached out carefully to grab my towel. When I stepped out of the shower, I found a message scrawled on the bathroom mirror, written in the condensation from the shower. "Just let me in." I stared at it, pulse roaring in my ears. Sobs racked my body as I realized that I wasn't crazy and someone had been here. The words were faint, almost ethereal. I turned to the door, and it was locked, just as it had been when I entered. I called the police, but their investigation turned up nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence to suggest anyone had been inside. I shoved my phone in his face, forcing him to look at the picture I snapped of the mirror again. The officer looked at me with that practiced, half-pitying expression I would come to despise. He didn't believe me. Nobody would. None of the locks were broken, no windows smashed or opened, no fingerprints, just the picture I had taken. Did he think I was making this up? My days became a blur of anxious rituals, triple-checking the locks and windows, drawing the curtains, and listening to every creak of the building. Every sound sent me to the verge of tears. At night, the nightmares started. They were vivid, terrible dreams of being hunted by a faceless figure, always just out of reach. I would wake drenched in sweat, my heart racing. My phone began to vibrate at odd hours, unknown numbers, never any sound on the other end. But the worst part was the photos. It started with one, a picture of me walking down the street, taken from a distance. Then another of me at the grocery store, and a third of me sitting on the couch in my apartment, alone. The last picture was taken from my kitchen. I hadn't seen anyone. I hadn't heard anyone. I once again went to the police. I showed him the pictures I received, and he collected my phone as evidence. Once again, it turned up nothing. The sender couldn't be traced. My mind frayed. It was like this person was getting inside my head, twisting my thoughts, making me doubt everything and everyone. I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they either laughed it off or grew distant, uncomfortable with my growing paranoia. What's wrong with them? Why is everyone so casual about all of this? Do they think this is a game? I became suspicious of my friends, and the ones who did try and reach me, I didn't give them the opportunity to do so. My sleep became shallow and broken, the hours blending together as fear gnawed at my sanity. The presence grew more brazen. I started finding my windows unlocked, though I never touched them. One night, I woke to a cold breeze drifting in through the bedroom window, curtains flapping. I know I'd had it closed and locked before I went to bed. Heart hammering, I bolted upright, scanning the room for any sign of an intruder. There was none, yet I knew something had been there. The air felt charged, thick with an unseen weight, pressing down on me. I was slowly going insane. The nightmares worsened. No longer confined to sleep, they began to seep into my waking hours. The world around me felt distorted, stretched. Every shadow seemed to move, every flicker of light a threat. I saw the figure in my peripheral vision, just standing there, watching, but when I turned, it would vanish. And then the whispering started. At first, just faint mutterings at the edge of my consciousness, barely audible like a faint wind. But the voice grew clearer. "I see you. I'm close. So close. Just let me in." I no longer heard it, just on the verge on sleep. I heard it right over my shoulder as I was watching TV, making coffee, staring out of the window. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was something else, something inhuman, cold. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I barely left my apartment, kept every light on, but it didn't matter. I couldn't escape it, couldn't sleep. My mind was slowly unraveling. One night, in a desperate attempt to confront the entity, I stayed up, hiding a knife under my pillow. I heard the footsteps again, louder this time. A figure moved in the hallway. I was sure of it. I could see the shadowy imprint of feet from underneath the door. I leapt out of bed, knife in hand, but when I swung the door open, there was nothing. No one in the whole apartment. Except when I was getting back into bed, I saw something in the mirror, a reflection, not my own. A dark silhouette, featureless, standing where I should have been, whispering to me all the while. It wasn't long before I understood the truth. This thing wasn't just stalking me, it was becoming a part of me. My paranoia, my fear, it was feeding off me, driving me mad. I found myself outside more often now, pacing the streets at night, lurking in the shadows like the figure had once done to me. I could feel its influence inside my head, whispering to me, guiding my actions. The whispering wasn't something to be afraid of. It was comforting. It would keep me safe. I didn't feel watched anymore. I felt compelled to follow others, compelled to stand unmoving outside the windows of strangers, watching, waiting. I felt their fear, their confusion, and it brought me a strange sense of calm, of power. This thing had become a part of me, and in doing so had made me into something else. One evening, I saw a woman walking alone, much like I had done all those months ago. Without thinking, I followed her, staying just far enough behind to remain unseen. The woman glanced over her shoulder, her steps quickening, panic clear in her body language. I smiled. I couldn't remember when it had all begun. Was the figure in the shadows, or had it always been lurking in my mind, waiting for the right moment? As I stood there, watching the woman disappear into her apartment, I understood. It whispered to me, first in my sleeping, and then in my waking. Biding its time, waiting for me to let it in, waiting so patiently to turn me into the very thing I had feared. Now, I was the one watching. You think that was the worst? Oh, the real horror is just around the corner. My husband sprints in straight lines. What happens when he can't? What is it about spirits that we fear so much? That they'll harm us? Make us jump? That nobody will believe us? For my husband, it's what they can show us. I don't want to see. It was the first time I had ever heard him truly terrified. We were new to the area at the time, walking through a local park for the first time. After living at our previous apartment for so long, where the landlord had a strict no pets policy, we were seriously considering getting a dog. I asked about when we would go to a local dog shelter. That's when he said it. I don't want to see. He froze still too, looking far ahead. Past the horizon, beyond even any of the buildings past the park's edge. I tried to meet his eyes, but they stared right through me. I turned to find where his gaze lay, but saw nothing. Turning back, concerned and confused, I tried to get clarification. You don't want to see the dogs? Please. His voice now shaky, begging, don't make me see. He turned and sprinted in the other direction, in a straight line. As the pathway curved, he did not adjust his route, running straight onto the grass and climbing the fence, despite an open gate standing just 20 feet to the left. I ran after him, of course, even climbing the fence. When your partner makes a break for it like that, as if their life is in danger, you trust them. You assume they saw something that you hadn't spotted. I was too afraid to turn around to see whoever was chasing us. Yet, as I landed the other side of the fencing, he was already down the street. He hadn't helped me up, or down, or even waited on the other side. Did he care that little for my safety? Then he collapsed. The hospital staff were not helpful. A brain scan showed no signs of anything abnormal. They seemed to take my word that he didn't do any type of drugs, although I'm sure in their many tests, quite a few of them were for hallucinogenics. Your husband is perfectly healthy, the nurse told me. Just make sure he rests well and drinks enough water. Healthy? I looked at her with a scowl. Healthy? You think collapsing to the ground after a manic episode is healthy? Ma'am, I can only tell you what our tests show. We can prescribe certain medications, but we can't imagine it helping. The odds are that this was a strange, one-off situation. Lack of sleep, lack of water, lack of any basic need can cause this type of behavior. What do you think, honey? I asked my husband. I think we should go home. He didn't seem normal over the next week. He was never quite himself. He would still talk and help me with dinner. But between all those moments, he felt hollow, never smiling or laughing. One moment in particular, we were watching a movie. I don't even remember the name, just some random crap on TV. But I caught myself watching him more than the screen, analyzing every little movement of his face, willing him to do anything that makes him him. Through all the jokes, watching the corners of his mouth, unmoving, not even a little bit. What was on his mind? Believe me, I asked him about the day at the park more times than I can count, and that was just on the drive home from the hospital. but he had very little answers for me. He just insisted that he saw something that he didn't want to be shown again. He turned to me. "Sorry," I spoke. "I was just looking at you." I smiled, hoping for him to return the gesture. He was silent. "Why don't you smile anymore?" My own smile faded. "I miss it." His mouth opened, then closed slightly, like he had lost his train of thought. "I don't want to see." No, don't do that to me. Please, please, I don't want to see." "No, don't you dare, don't." He started to get up. I tried to hold him, but he just backed away. He was staring at the living room door. "Please, don't make me see." He turned and ran. He didn't let the window stop him. He just smashed the glass and climbed outside. As he ran down the street, I heard a tire skidding on the road, as a car had to brake suddenly to avoid hitting him. I saw him run right through the garden across from us and down their side alley, out of my sight. It was like he had to run in a perfectly straight line, escaping by the way the crow flies. Like a slight deviation from this path wasn't even conceivable to him. This only got more frequent, with his mental well-being declining. Every time this happened, he came out of the experience more paranoid. "I saw it again," he'd tell me. "Please, don't let me see it again." I wanted to help him, but he would never explain to me what he saw. What was he running from? The weeks turned into months. He stopped talking much at all. I knew when he was about to have an episode from the sudden staring at an empty location. His escape was always preceded by a simple, "I don't want to see." 2 days ago, we were in the bathroom. It's important to note that our bathroom has no windows. It's in the center of the house, structurally speaking, so they wouldn't be able to lead anywhere. I had just got my husband to brush his teeth after days of him hardly leaving the bedroom. But this was also the longest he had gone without running away for a while. As he finished washing his face, he looked in the mirror, then turned around, staring at the bathroom door. "There's nothing there." I hugged him as I spoke, knowing that it wouldn't stop him. "I don't want to see." He started to cry. "Please, please don't make me see again. I can't see it again." He started backing away into a wall. It was only then that I noticed he had no way out. He would never leave through the door, not if that's where he was staring. Without fail, every time he would run in the exact opposite direction of whatever he was staring at. I tried to take his hand. "Come with me. Let's get out of here." "I can't see it." "I know, you don't have to." My voice was trembling now. I wanted to help him find a place to run. I was afraid of what he might do if he felt trapped. He was silent. He had usually ran by now. "Come on, let's go to the bedroom and you can run." No, he sounded so determined through his tears. "I can't see." He turned around, punching the wall. He didn't scream or flinch. The shriek echoing through the room was my own. He punched again, harder. I heard his bones crack. "I will not see." Blood marks were left on the wall where he threw his fists. Thump, thump, thump. "Please stop," I cried, wanting my husband back. "Please, let me help you." Thump, thump. He started to dent the wall. The paint flaked off in the area he was aiming for, precise with his strikes. Thump, thump, thump. I could hardly see any more through the tears in my eyes, but the blurry flurry of red on the wall made me not want to see. As he started to collapse, he continued. Thump, slower with his knocks now, his body simply unable to keep the same momentum and energy that his mind wanted to exert. I'm about to see. A puddle of blood on the floor soaked into his clothes where he lay. I held him as tight as I could. "Don't let me see," he continued. I won't let anything happen to you." I'm not sure he understood me in his state, but I kept repeating it to him as his voice got quieter and quieter. "He's in the hospital again now. He still hasn't woken up. I haven't returned home. I'm afraid of what I might see." That was just the beginning. The next story will make you question what's real. My daughter got her first rotter by the teeter-totter. I don't feel that way anymore, like we don't fit in here. My new job is perfect. It really is. I don't think my boss is creepy or that they have weird rules about the edge of the forest, where we have those 2 mossy picnic benches and people come outside to smoke on their breaks. I'm really good with it now. My husband wasn't doing anything wrong. I know I said I thought he was up to something, like maybe having him the A word or something. He is a really great guy and I trust him completely. It's fine. The kids are both doing really great in school. making lots of friends and everything. In fact, that's what's up, the whole thing with the kids and the school. It's just going so well, I have to talk about that. I would complain about one thing though, off topic, and that's my new car. I really can't complain though, since my new car is just fine. Everything is just fine. I know we had some trouble when we first got here, like with my job and my husband and my car and the school and the kids and everything, but it's all going so well. Nothing is wrong, and everything is just perfect now. You don't have to worry, I am doing great. Mike took Samuel hunting the other day, since it is hunting season out here and all the guys go hunting. I was worried, because Mike knows almost nothing about hunting or the woods, but they were fine out there. They didn't shoot anything, but they went out into the woods with their guns and camped and bonded and came home without even so much as a tick bite. So everything turned out fine with that. Mike has lots of new friends in town, and he goes and does karaoke every Saturday. I'd go with him, but there's no need. It's not like he doesn't want me to come, or that he stays out all night with those girls at the bar or anything. I fully trust him, and I don't mind him going out without me. Samuel asked out Sheila Style to the junior dance, and she heard he'd gone hunting with his dad, and totally said she'd go out with him. So Samuel is doing great. He's all smiles. I think we are starting to really fit in around here. I know Iris was having some trouble with the kids and the playground. She's doing okay now. The vaccine took hold really well, and she stopped seeing the sick things. You remember those childhood drawings that were pretty upsetting, stuff she was seeing? Well, I was seeing them too, of course, but my vaccine worked too. And now we are fine. Porter's Grove is a nice place to live, and I am so glad we moved here. I couldn't find work doing the conduit job that pays like it does here. The whole town is built on the metric revenue of our work. You should see how the local economy flourishes. This place was dying before Orange got here. Sometimes now that I got my promotion, I feel like we sort of run this whole town. My family gets treated like royalty. Sheila Styles' parents didn't want her to go to the dance at all, and she isn't allowed to have a boyfriend, except she told them it was Samuel, my son, who wanted to go out with her, and they changed their minds. We're royalty. That's why I love it here. Our lives couldn't be going better. Yes, I know it was scary at first, living in a paper town like this, but we adjusted. The vaccine we got helped, as the sick stuff went away after that. Iris had it the worst, since she was too young for the whole first year after we moved here. I almost forgot what's out there. I haven't seen anything for a long time. They are drawn to people, apparently. At least that's my understanding. I'm not sure what those sick things want, but it isn't good, since they might try to get inside you. There is a rumor that when Orange got here, that's when they started coming out of the woods, attacking people and getting into them. I've heard that several people got so full of those things that they actually exploded, like really gross. I can only imagine, with some trepidation, how it would work. If just one of those things got into you, they would change you right away. You'd get sick too. Then, how could you stop more and more of them from coming to you, climbing up all over you, getting inside of you, and, well, I guess when that happens, the human body can only take so much of the viral overload. You'd simply detonate at some point, the fermentation process going totally nuclear. I was very afraid for a long time. I was afraid for myself, since I did get infected with one of them when we first moved here. I had to wear a special suit for a while, kind of like a beekeeper's suit, to keep any more of them from getting into me. Iris was terrified, I was terrified, and the whole town ostracized us. My car broke down, and it was within the compound on the way to work. Those things found me out there, crawling all over the outside of my car, trying to get in. I was panicked and trapped. They started finding their way into the car, through the vents and cracks, and from under the floor. I was covered in them. While I was paralyzed with dread, trapped in my car, my special suit covered in those things, I knew it wouldn't be long until they got into the suit and into me. I must have fainted from sheer terror, and when I awoke, I was in the facility and they had my stripped down and in a decontamination. My car got repairs and I was administered the new vaccine since it was too late to inoculate me. The needle was about 5 inches long and they had to put it into my thymus, through my neck. I really hate needles, and I was somehow even more terrified by the cure than the disease. Mike wasn't very supportive before the company re-educated him. After that, he was great, since he was no longer able to ignore me or disobey me or lie to me. That's how I know he's fine out there, with the waitresses at the bar and the karaoke. I'm holding all the keys. Our house is awesome. We moved out of the old haunted 2-story one we moved here into. Orange paid it all off and bought me a new house within the compound. It's like living in a gated community. I did mention that I got a promotion, and I didn't say they made me senior director. I only answer to Kinley himself. Some people say terrible things about him. I know I was afraid of him for a while, but he's really not some crazy mad scientist billionaire. He's just eccentric and misunderstood. You just have to get to know him a little. I love my boss. He's hardworking and really provided for me and my family. So things in Porter's Grove are good and great and just living the dream. Iris had one last incident involving an animal that wandered out onto the playground. I went to the teachers' conference, nothing to be worried about or anything. My kids get very good grades and never get into trouble. It's just that one thing that happened. Yes, I was scared to hear about it. It reminded me of some of the terrifying things I encountered here. I thought back about seeing all that sick stuff. The gross, deformed critters, half dead, attracted to me because of what the parasites had done to their brainstems. Modified hosts. I guess it is like that nature video we watched that one time. The one with the zombified ants, or the beetle with the worm in it that flips onto its back and kicks its legs until a bird eats it. Or the slug that gets that thing in its eye stalk that also gets eaten by birds. Those sick things, those former animals, little more than robots controlled by the parasite inside them. Before we were immunized, they'd come for me, for Iris. So it got pretty scary when something all mangy and twitchy would limp and hop towards us, like watching roadkill come towards you, knowing that it is dead and rotting. I told Iris not to let them come near her. I'd watched those woods, couldn't take my eyes off the edge of the trees all around town. Something was watching me right back, sending its probes, its spores, whatever they are. Iris was sitting outside at recess, and the rest of the kids fled from it. Iris just sat there, too terrified to move. My worst fear was that she'd come in contact with one of the sick things we often saw. They aren't animals anymore. I guess this one was like a puppy to her, somehow. Although it had empty eye sockets, it knew where she was and came straight for her, wagging what was left of its tail, trying to seem friendly. I was told she had finally snapped out of it, that she had jumped up on the teeter-totter and brought it crashing down on it before she got up and fled inside. It never got to her, didn't have a chance. She was like a hero. The teachers praised her and told her how brave and special she was. Somehow, Kinley heard about the incident and asked me about Iris personally. I told him she's my daughter and that we might be scared, but we take action. He nodded and told me he appreciates both me and my family, and said, "There's a place for us here." So we are doing better than great. As to us moving back out there, or just packing up and leaving all this behind and staying with you, that's not going to happen. I appreciate that you were willing to put us up like that, but it isn't necessary. In fact, my new house is huge. If you and Charles start having problems again, you can just take the kids and come live with me out here. I know you'll love it here. Everything is just perfect. You think you've seen it all? The next story will make you reconsider. My roommate is glowing. I don't know how to fix her, and I'm running out of options. Well, hello there, Reddit. Long-time lurker here, and unfortunately, I think I need help. I really didn't want to take this avenue, but I don't know if I have any options here. Sorry if this is a bit long. There's a lot of context that needs to be included for this to make even a little bit of sense. Let me preface this by saying that I am not really a believer in the paranormal. I may be a writer, but I can still tell the difference between reality and imagination. The only reason I'm even writing this is because my more superstitious friends begged me to. One of my friends, Greg, honestly, friend is a stretch. We tolerate him because he's the only one who's 21. Do with that what you will, is one of those urban explorer types, always finding strange places to terrorize. A couple weeks back, He mentioned hearing about a local cemetery that he wanted to check out. Our other friend, Ellis, who is a native of the area, said that this cemetery in particular was one of the oldest in the city and housed some cool mausoleums and spooky urban legends. Somehow, the pair managed to convince my high school friend, JD, our token gold-hearted himbo frat boy and truck owner, to drive them the 2 miles to said cemetery that Friday. My longtime best friend and roommate Lily dragged me along. She's constantly trying to convince me to get out and about more. I believe this time her exact words were, "You have to unglue your nose from your books and computer and actually exist for once." I tried to remind her that most pharmacy majors are too busy to bother with free time or friends, but her enthusiasm was infectious. When she gets excited about something, she starts bouncing on the tips of her toes and grinning like a cat, eyes full of eagerness for the next bout of playful trouble she can get herself into. So the 5 of us and 2 6-packs of beer piled into JD's truck and headed to the old graveyard once the sun set. Fortunately, the gates to the cemetery were locked. Unfortunately, JD made the grave mistake of pointing out a rather strange-looking single-story building across the street. "What do y'all think that might be?" "Not sure," Greg responded, poking his head between the front row's headrests to get a better look. I leaned away from him, trying to hide my distaste at his general cigarette and sweat odor. "Want to go check it out?" I started to protest, but was immediately overruled by Ellis, Greg, and Lily, who were practically clamoring for JD to park the truck so they could explore. JD let out a long-suffering sigh, lips twitching into a smile, and relented, pulling up next to the building. Lily bounced out of the truck, Ellis and Greg not far behind. I rolled my eyes at JD, who chuckled and ruffled my hair. "Is little Miss Hazel scared?" "Shut up," I grumbled, batting his hand away as we joined the trio, already waiting nervously at the edge of the property. There were no lights on in or near the building, save for an eerie cerulean glow leaking out from behind a frosted window that was in stark contrast with the red brick and white colonial columns of the exterior. The 5 of us stood in silence for a moment, on edge and unsure of what exactly this strange structure was. Something about the architecture felt off, like the walls were too high or the width of the windows wasn't quite right. I fought off a shudder and rubbed my arms to remind myself to stop being childish. It's just an old building that happens to have had an eccentric designer and is across the street from a massive cemetery. "It's a toy hospital," Greg said, squinting at the aged sign hanging over the dark wooden door. Ellis was already looking up the name of the business, shoving their long purple hair out of their eyes and squinting at their phone. "It's currently in business," they mused, scrolling through the website. "Listen to this. About us. We painstakingly search thrift stores and garage sales for any abandoned friends, bring them to our hospital, and get them fixed up for adoption. If you're interested in making the lifelong commitment of caring for one of our rehabilitated patients, you can come to one of our meet and greets or fill out an adoption application form." I frowned and glanced over at Ellis, making sure to keep the building in my periphery. Something about the blue light in the window was putting me on edge. A meet and greet with who? The owners? Ellis shook their head, a look of confusion and distaste on their face. "No, I think with the toys. These people have petting zoos for their stuffed animals, robot cleaning services, $100 for a cleaning service? Christ, that's practically highway robbery." Greg snorted and stood on his toes to try and peer into a window. "Who wants to go in first?" Of course, Lily took the first step towards the entrance. "Lily, no," I hissed, smacking her arm and glancing around to make sure there was nobody watching us. "Going along with a guy who willingly paid for a Pickle Rick tattoo? That's the worst idea you've had at least this week." I ignored Greg's scoff and middle finger and kept my eyes on Lily. She laughed and took another step, playfully wiggling her eyebrows at me. "Oh, come on, Hazel. There's nobody here, and I doubt there's cameras. Besides, who knows what sorts of fun, creepy shit could be in there?" I threw my hands up in the air in resignation, and the 4 of us watched as Lily crept up to the front door. Each step seemed agonizingly drawn out, and with every inch Lily gained, my shoulders grew more and more tense. My eyes flicked to that blue light again. It seemed to be gently pulsating now, almost as if something within the building was pulling Lily in, hypnotizing her, calling to her with an obscene siren song. Everything went quiet the moment she set foot on the porch, the kind of oppressive quiet that shoves in on your eardrums, the pressure building and building until you can't stand it anymore, and the only thing you can do is take a needle or an ice pick or a knife and prick and poke and stab until they pop. Then Lily pushed the door open. The click of the handle brought sound rushing back as the portal yawned, black and foreboding. I shivered again, glancing up at JD. He looked just as hesitant as I did. "Lily, hold on a second." But she had already disappeared into the interior of the toy hospital. We all went still, listening intently for any sign of danger. My heartbeat sounded loudly in my ears, and I tapped my foot nervously as I stared into the strange building. There was no sound, save for the breathing of my friends and the gentle rustle of wind in the trees. Something shifted behind a window, and I watched with apprehension as the blue luminance shrank and shrank until it was a mere flicker. Just as that sinister light finally surrendered to darkness, a piercing scream rent the silence around us. JD swore and bolted towards the entrance, Ellis and I not far behind. We had barely made it 10 feet before Lily scrambled frantically backwards out of the door, almost like a crab scuttling away from a predator. She leapt up and ran to us, green eyes wild and box-bleached hair disheveled as terrified, wordless sounds spilled from her mouth. Lily, take a breath." I clutched her shoulders and forced her to look at me. "What the hell happened?" Her gaze flicked from the doorway to me and back again. I'll never forget the look on her face. Lily and I have known each other for years. I've seen her eyes full of joy and enthusiasm, seen them swollen and swimming with tears, seen them exhausted and desolate. But never before had I seen the boundless distress and disgust and abject horror that I saw on her face that night. Lily gasped for air, burying her face in my shoulder as she trembled. I don't know. I thought I felt something push me, and there was a gasping sound right in my ear. Her voice shook as I held her and JD gently rubbed her back. I glanced back at Greg, who unsurprisingly hadn't moved from his spot on the sidewalk. He just looked confused and slightly curious, not a hint of fear or concern on his face. Once I had calmed Lily down enough so she could walk without her knees giving way, we climbed back into JD's truck and hightailed it back to campus. Ellis, Greg and I peppered her with questions about what touched her, if she saw anything, what the inside of the toy hospital looked like. She didn't answer any of them, saying she wanted to just move on and not think about it. The drained, faraway look in her eyes was enough to convince us to leave her be. JD dropped us off at our respective dorms about 15 minutes later. Lily seemed fine the next morning, a bit tired, but in good enough spirits. I tried to get her to come with me for a late breakfast at our dorm's dining hall, but she shook her head and said she was expecting a call from her mom. I brought her back a waffle, and to my surprise, she wolfed it down like she hadn't eaten anything in days. None of our other friends said anything about our misadventure for the rest of the week. I think we all just wanted to forget about it and let the semester carry on. Halloween was coming up, and we all wanted to get ahead on homework so we could spend the last week of October partying. I followed their lead, pushing the memory of the experience far away into the mental realm where dreams and wishes and nightmares live. It didn't stop me from worrying about Lily, though. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but she seemed to be losing weight despite the sudden uptick in her appetite. When I asked her about it, she just chalked it up to being busy with midterms. I agreed, not because I actually thought this was the case, but because I desperately wanted the explanation to be something as average as a hefty workload. Lily was fine until the other night. I woke up at 2 a.m, shaken by the distinct feeling of being watched. I'm prone to night terrors, so this isn't new to me, but something felt different this time. I had to blink blearily a few times before my mind could fully process what I was seeing. Lily was standing stock still in the middle of our room, facing the window. Her back was to me, body stiff as a board, fingers stretched out and rigid at her sides. "Lily?" I called out softly, sitting up and peering closer. She didn't move, save for a twitch of her fingers as I stood up and circled around to face her. Lily's eyes were completely shut, irises frantically darting back and forth underneath her lids. "Hey, Elle, wake up," I said, gently tapping her shoulder, unsure of what to do. Her throat worked as if she were trying to say something, but her mouth didn't move. My eyes fell to the shift of her esophagus, and I stumbled back, almost falling onto her bed at what I saw. It looked almost as if she had swallowed a glow stick, soft, blue light leaking out through the muscle and around her windpipe. Almost as soon as I noticed the peculiarity, it vanished. Lily took a deep, heaving breath as her eyes flew open and her body relaxed. She ran a hand through her hair, forehead creasing a bit in confusion. "Hazel? What's wrong?" All I could do for a moment was stare at her, trying to process what I had seen. My mind darted around for an excuse, but all I could say was, You were sleepwalking." Lily shook her head, clearly still half asleep. "That's weird. Sorry if I freaked you out." I just shook my head, opening my mouth to try and explain. But before I could find the words, she gave a jaw-cracking yawn, flopped onto her bed, and went back to sleep. I tossed and turned all night, trying to rationalize what I had seen, even flipping through some of my pharmacy textbooks for any kind of explanation. Nothing. There was no scientific reasoning that I could find for why Lily's throat had been lit up from the inside. I finally caved and texted JD and Ellis, hoping they might have some insight. JD had no idea, but Ellis said that it could be something paranormal and possibly related to the toy hospital we visited. Ellis is terribly predisposed to seeking out more fantastical answers over mundane ones, and was actually the one to suggest asking Reddit. But their comment did help me make one terrible, disturbing connection. The luminous glow emanating from Lily's throat was the same shade as the cerulean light at the toy hospital. I don't know what to do. The last few nights Lily has been sleepwalking more, and yesterday I caught her trying to somnambulate out of the dorm room. She's never sleepwalked before and seems completely oblivious to her late-night antics. I don't know if I should tell her or if that would make things worse. Lily has already been through way too much, and I don't want to add to her already heavy mental struggles. So that's why I'm here, asking strangers on the internet for advice on how to help my friend. At this point, I don't really care what the explanation is, as long as I have one, because right now I am at a complete loss. Any thoughts, suggestions, or the like would be much appreciated. Hold on tight. The real fear is still ahead in the next tale. Matey and the Ghost. When I moved in with Grandma about 5 years ago, I didn't know what to expect. Grandma had been living alone since Grandpa died earlier that year. And when they diagnosed her with dementia when I was a senior in high school, it seemed like a bad omen. Though they had caught it early, the doctors had suggested that living alone would probably only help her condition deteriorate faster. Dementia patients often see their condition slow when they have company. Your mother has lived alone since your father died, and if someone were able to live with her, I think the ability to have someone to talk to would help her immensely. Mom and Dad had looked at each other, not sure what to do about the situation, but seemed to come to a decision pretty quickly. With me looking at college and them unable to afford housing in the dorms, they offered me a compromise. Live with my grandma and attend college nearby, or spend some time trying to get scholarships and grants to pay for my own housing. Grandma and I had always been close, and she was delighted to let me stay with her while I attended college. There was no worry that I would sneak boys in or throw parties. I wasn't really someone who did that sort of thing, and they knew that I would be home most evenings studying or resting for the coming day. I moved in at the beginning of the academic year, and that meant I was there for Halloween. Grandma and I had been living pretty harmoniously, only butting heads a few times when I came home late from classes. Grandma liked to be in bed by 9, and she didn't like to be woken up when I came in late. Grandma liked to spend most of her time in bed, watching TV and knitting, but I still came in when I had the chance to talk with her and visit. Some days she knew who I was, some days she thought I was my mom, but she was never hostile or confused with me. If she called me by my mom's name, I was Claire, and if she called me by my name, then I was Julia. Either way, we talked about our day and about life in general. I learned a lot of family secrets that way, things that she was surprised I didn't remember, and I was glad for this time with her while she was still lucid. So when I came in to find her putting candy in a bowl, I was shocked she was out of bed. She was huffing and puffing, clearly exhausted, and I wondered when she'd had time to buy the candy. She didn't drive, didn't have a car, and I didn't remember buying it. She looked up happily, holding the bowl out to me in greeting. "Claire, there you are. I wanted to hand candy out to the kids, but I feel so weak. I must be coming down with something, but I can't disappoint the kiddos." Grandma seemed to forget that she was pushing 65 and not in what anyone would call good health. When she did too much and ran out of energy, she always said she must be coming down with something and took herself off to bed to rest, and it seemed to be her mind's way of explaining it. Somehow it seemed I had forgotten it was Halloween, but Grandma hadn't. It wasn't that surprising. If there was one thing you could count on Grandma to remember, it was Halloween. Grandma had always been in love with Halloween, at least according to Mom. She'd insisted I decorate earlier in the month, had made us get a pumpkin from the store, which I then carved and set on the stoop. And if she had been in better health, she would have likely been in costume handing out candy. As it stood, she was lucky to have made it from her room to the table, and I knew it. I took the bowl and told her not to worry, and that I would make sure the kids got their candy. She thanked me and went to lie down, her energy spent. I went to the porch to put out the bowl of candy. I put a note on the stool so the kids knew it was a 2-piece limit, and came back in to study. Today might be sugar palooza for the little goblins out in the street, but for me, tomorrow was chem midterm and I needed to study. I was doing well, but this was only freshman year. I had big dreams and they would be harder to fulfill with poor marks in chemistry. I heard the kids shrieking and giggling as they came up the road, heard their footsteps on the porch, heard the step pause in speculation as they read the sign, and then heard them retreat after they took their candy. Grandma lived in a fairly nice area, and the kiddos seemed used to the 2-piece rule. I'm sure some of them took a handful and ran, but they seemed to be in the minority if they did. It was dark out, probably pushing 9, when I heard a knock on the door. I looked up from my book, peering at the door as I saw the outline of a little kid in a ghost costume. He was standing there patiently, bag in hand, and I wondered how he had missed the bowl and the sign. Maybe he was looking for an authentic experience, or maybe he was special needs. Either way, I got up and walked over to the door to see what he wanted. I opened the door to find a kid in an honest-to-God bedsheet ghost costume. He looked right out of a Charlie Brown special, and the shoes poking out from the bottom looked like loafers. He held a grubby pillowcase in one hand and a candy apple in the other, and when he looked up at me through the holes in his sheet, I almost laughed. He looked like a caricature, like a memory of a Halloween long ago, and I wasn't sure he would speak for a moment. When he did, I wished he hadn't. His voice was raspy, unused, and it sucked all the joy out of me. "Is Maddie here?" he asked, and I shook my head as I tried to get my own voice to work. "Nah, sorry kiddo, there's no matey here." He nodded and then turned and left with slow, somber steps. I thought it was odd. He hadn't even taken any candy, and when I closed the door and went back to my work, I was filled with a strange and unexplainable sense of dread. I had forgotten about it by the time Halloween rolled around again, but the little ghost hadn't forgotten about us. October 31st found me, once again, sitting at the table and studying for a midterm. I was still working on my prerequisites for biochem, and if everything went as planned, I'd be starting the course next year. Grandma was much the same, maybe a little more tired and a little more forgetful, but we still spent a lot of evenings chatting and watching TV. Sometimes she braided my hair, and sometimes she showed me how to knit, but we always spent at least an hour together every evening. Tonight, she had turned in early, saying she was really tired and wanted to get some rest before this cold caught up to her. I had sat the candy bowl on the front porch, careful to add the usual note, and when someone knocked on the door at 8:30, I looked up to see the same little silhouette I had seen the year before. I got up, telling myself it couldn't be the same kid, But when I opened the door, there he was. The same bedsheet ghost costume, the same faux leather loafers, the same bulge around the eyes to indicate glasses, the same slightly dirty pillowcase. It was him, just as he had been the year before, and I almost prayed he would remember before speaking. "Is Maddie here?" he asked in the same croaking voice, and I tried not to shudder as I smiled down at him. "Sorry, kiddo. Wrong house." He nodded solemnly, turning around and slowly walking back up the front walk as he made his way back to the street. I watched him go, not quite sure what to make of this strange little ghost boy or his apparent lack of growth. The kid looked like he might be about 5 or 6, though his voice sounded like he might be 5 or 6 years in his grave. I briefly considered that he might be a real ghost, but I put that out of my mind. It was the time of year, nothing more. I went back to studying, finishing out the evening by visiting with Grandma when she got up from her nap unexpectedly. We drank cocoa and watched a scary movie, and I fell asleep beside her in the bed she had once shared with Grandpa. The next year saw the return of the little ghost boy, and he was unchanging. I tried to ask him why he kept coming back after being told she wasn't here for 2 years running. I wanted to ask him why he thought she was here, but I couldn't bring myself to ask him anything. There was a barrier between us that went deeper than a misunderstanding, and it was like we were standing on opposite sides of a gulf and shouting at each other over the tide. He left when I didn't say anything, nodding and turning like he always did before disappearing into the crowd. I didn't see him the year after that, but to be fair, I was a little preoccupied. That was my 4th year in college, and I was only a year from graduating and moving on to work in the field of biochemistry. I had been heading home when a colleague of mine invited me to a little department party. I was helping my teacher as a TA, and the other TAs were having a little get-together in honor of the season. I started to decline, but I thought it might be fun. I had never really allowed myself to get into the college scene, never really partied or hung out with friends, and all that focus takes a toll sometimes. I hadn't really been to a social gathering since high school, and I was curious to see what it was like. I'll admit I indulged a little more than I should have, but when I came home and found my grandmother lying by the front door, it sobered me up pretty quickly. Her doctor said that she had fallen when she tried to get to the door, and I couldn't help but wonder if she had been going to answer the knocking of a certain little ghost boy. They kept her in the hospital for nearly 3 months, monitoring her and making sure she hadn't given herself brain damage or something. Her condition progressed while she was in the hospital, and after a time, she either only recognized me as my mother or didn't recognize me at all. She began asking for Albie, always looking for Albie, but I didn't know who that was. Mom was puzzled too, wondering if maybe she was talking about her dad, whose name had been Albert. I've never heard her call him Albie, but I suppose it could be a nickname. They knew each other as children, so it's entirely possible. After a while, they sent her home, but the prognosis was not good. They gave her less than a year to live, saying she would need round-the-clock care from now on. I didn't need to be asked this time. I felt guilty for not being there, and I knew that I had to be there for her now. I took a leave of absence from school, putting my plans on hold so I could take care of my grandma. I continued to take some courses online, hoping to not get too far behind, but I devoted most of my time to her. She was mostly unresponsive, whispering sometimes as she called out for Albie or her mother and father, great-grandparents I had never met. She talked to Albie about secret places and hidden treasures, and her voice was that of a little girl now. She had regressed even more, and every day that I woke up to find her breathing was a blessing. Grandma proved them wrong, and when Halloween came around again, I was in for a surprise. I had taken to sleeping on a cot at the foot of her bed, keeping an ear out for any sounds of trouble, but a loud clatter from the kitchen had me rolling to my feet and looking around in confusion. I looked at the bed and saw she was still in it, so the sound couldn't have been her. As another loud bang sounded in that direction, I was off and moving before I could think better of it. I was afraid that an animal had gotten into the house. No burglar would have made that much noise. And when I came into the kitchen, I saw, Just for a second, the furry black backside of some cat or dog, or maybe a small bear. As it climbed out of the cabinet it had been rooting through, I saw it was a person, though it was certainly a grubby one. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, and she looked filthy. She was wearing a threadbare black dress with curly-toed shoes and a pointed hat that she scooped off the floor. The longer I watched her, the more I came to understand that she wasn't really dirty, but had covered herself lightly in stove ash for some reason. She didn't seem to have noticed me. She was digging through cupboards and drawers as she searched for whatever it was she was after, leaving destruction in her wake. "Hey," I called out after some of my surprise had faded. "What are you doing?" The girl turned and looked confused as she took me in. "What are you doing here?" "This is my house. You better leave before my mama sees you and gets mad." She continued to look through things, working her way into the living room, and I followed behind her, not sure what to say. Was this a dream? If it was a pretty vivid one. I could feel the carpet beneath my feet, hear the leaky faucet in the kitchen, smell the lunch I had cooked a few hours before. The little girl had wrecked half the living room before I shook off my discomfort and asked her what she was looking for. If this was a dream, then I suppose I had to play along. "I need my pillowcase, the one with the pumpkin on it. It's my special Halloween bag, and I can't go trick-or-treating without it." I opened my mouth to ask where she'd left it, but I stopped suddenly as something occurred to me. I had seen that pillowcase before. It had been in Grandma's closet for ages, and when I had offered to wash it for her, she had shaken her head and said it had too many memories. There was a pumpkin drawn on one side in charcoal, a black cat on the other side, and a witch's hat between them. Someone had sewn strings around the top so it could be pulled shut, and it looked like a grubby peddler's sack. Surely if this was a dream, then Grandma wouldn't mind if I gave this child the bag. Maybe that's why she had been keeping it, just in case this kid came looking for it. I told the girl to wait for a minute, and that I would get it for her. "Okay, but hurry. Halloween won't last all night." It took a little looking, but I finally found it under some old quilts at the top of the closet. At some point, Grandma must have recolored the cat and hat, and I wondered when she'd had the energy. She hadn't even been out of bed without me by her side in over a year, so she must have done this before her fall. I took the bag out to the living room and held it out to the girl who was leaning against the sofa. Her eyes lit up and she snatched it happily as she danced around and thanked me. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she trumpeted. "Now I can go trick-or-treating." As soon as, and as if on cue, a knock came from the door. The little witch ran to answer it, and I was unsurprised to see the little ghost boy waiting for her. "Maybe," he said happily, and she wrapped him in a hug like she hadn't seen him in years. "Albie," she trumpeted in return. "Ready to go?" "For ages, slowpoke," he said, the smile beneath the sheet coming out in his words. The two left the porch hand in hand, disappearing out into the crowd as they went to go trick-or-treating. I watched them go, feeling a mixture of warmth and completion, and that was when I remembered my grandma. I had left her alone for a long while, and when I went to check on her, I found her too still in her bed. I started to begin CPR, but after putting a couple of fingers to her throat, I knew it was too late. She was cold. She had likely been dead before I was awoken by the clatter in the kitchen, and I held back tears as I called the ambulance and let my parents know that she had passed. The funeral was quick. Grandma was laid to rest next to Grandpa, and a week later I was helping Mom clean out Grandma's house. It was my house now. Grandma had left it to me in her will, and Mom was packing up some mementos and deciding what to donate. We were going through her closet when I found a box with keepsakes in it. There were pictures of my mom when she was little, wedding photos of Grandma and Grandpa, and some letters Grandpa had written her during Vietnam. Mom came over as I was going through them, smiling at the pictures and crying a little over the letters. But I felt my breath stick in my throat as I came to a very old photo at the bottom of the box. It was a small photo of two kids in costumes on the front porch of a much different house. One was a ghost, his eye holes bulging with glasses, and the other was a witch who had clearly rubbed wood ash on her face. "Julia?" Mom asked, the picture shaking in my hand. Honey, are you okay? The picture fell back into the box, and there on the back was the last piece of the puzzle. Madeline and Albert, Halloween 1960. That was the last I saw of the little witch or the ghost. But when Halloween comes to call, the two are never very far from my mind. I always hand out candy and decorate the house, just as Grandma would have wanted. You never quite know what sort of ghosts and goblins might come to visit. That last story was chilling, but this next one will make your heart race. Student chainsaw nurses. Detective Scott zoomed in on the files he had gathered that outlined how to enter the abandoned asylum from the entrance beside the meatpacking plant sign. The grounds of the old asylum still had their old wrought iron gates surrounding them, majestically. It could have passed for a public park even, except part of the asylum had been sold off and turned into a meatpacking plant. Detective Scott took in the grisly industrial nature of it all. He felt awkward in his Adidas tracksuit, but he was trying to pass as a uni student and knew that would help him look the right age. Scott had answered the ad. He'd told the group of nurses he was looking for some extra cash and that he'd like to take part in their clinical trial. After a series of grueling questions, he seemed to convince them he was desperate for the cash and he really needed to sell his kidney. His research had led him to the reality. St. Verity's asylum had become a nexus for organ trafficking. As Detective Scott approached the waiting room, he glanced in the mirror to make sure he gave off the air of looking like a poor student. He left one of his shoes unlaced for effect and signed himself in. His intel had reports of several nurses that had formed a cult, an organization with dark rituals tied to the hospital's profit from illicit organ sales. Marnie? His boss told him. Marnie is the organizer, an informant. Let us know that's her name. Detective Scott listened for her. The sound of distant laughter echoed, followed by a high-pitched scream. Scott's eyes darted towards the sound. He patted his gun holster to be sure it was in its place and crept along the wall, down the hallway towards the sound, clinging tightly to his phone for its flashlight. The hallways were growing darker and dingier with each turn. Emerging into an operating room, he stopped to pause. He caught sight of strange shapes taped to the wall. Eerie dolls, their eyes glistening as they seemed to watch him, adorned the room. He was pondering if these were actually grim trophies of Marnie's cult sacrifices, when he noticed a glistening chainsaw hung from the wall. Suddenly, the door swung open and in charged a nurse with a chainsaw. She was tall and slender, dressed in an outdated nurse's uniform that hugged her frame too tightly. Her eyes searched the room, but Detective Scott had successfully ducked and hid himself behind the operating tables. "You shouldn't be here, Detective," she crooned, revving up the chainsaw. The raw, brutal growl rung out. Oil and smoke flung off the chainsaw. "This place is far too dangerous for someone like you." She screamed above the buzzing. She revved the engine in whirs. Detective Scott could see her feet coming for him. She flung under the table a little further out of her reach and lay as still as he could. "Come on out, Detective Scott. Come meet Marnie. You need to be repurposed." Scott's mind raced. He jumped up and took aim at her with his gun. "You're trafficking organs," he said, as he brought the gun up to his eye to take his best shot at her thigh. He only intended to sting her, to make her go down. Marnie laughed as the bullet ricocheted off her bulletproof armor. She turned the chainsaw off, almost as if she knew leisure was all hers. The people that come here, they become part of something so much larger than themselves. You see, Detective, every scream, every lost life is a celebration. And we, she stepped closer, her intent evident, we know just how to give the gift of life to others. Do you understand? But a sudden surge of adrenaline, Scott turned to flee. Marnie lunged as she pulled the chainsaw roaring to life. She was quick on his tail. She swung it in menacing arcs. He barely dodged, his heart pounding in rhythm with the machine's growl. He ran for his life, his instincts screaming at him to escape. The hallways of St. Verity's twisted around him, each turn revealing new horrors. A flicker of knives cutting patients open in the room's shadows, ghostly figures that seemed to be pushing carts of dead bodies down the hallway. Doors that had once held the promises of mental healing now led to rooms filled with grotesque, macabre displays of butchery. The more he searched for an exit, the more he realized there was no way out but through the meat packing plant. "Did you think you could escape?" Marnie's voice echoed. Now multiple student nurses had grabbed their chainsaws out of the operating room to chase Detective Scott, the intruder. He could smell the smoke of their chainsaws and the inhuman choir of female voices leering and screaming for his demise. He stumbled, running into the broiler room, but it felt as if shadows themselves were creeping into his mind, distorting his senses. He tripped on wiring taped to the floor. Marnie towered above him, oil spittle dripping off her hot, revving chainsaw. "Please," he gasped, pulling on her leg, desperate for her charity. "I will do anything you want. I will liberate." She twirled, the chainsaw dancing happily above her head. She kicked his head to the ground and put her shoe on his cheek. It was clear this was a joyous performance for her, set to the rhythm of terror. "I will free you from the constraints of this life." She pushed his head down, exposing the nape of his neck. He twisted, all vulnerable. "You don't want trapped in this mundane life, detective, do you? You want to soar with us, don't you?" In a flash of terror, Scott glimpsed up. A whole coven of student nurses now stood in a circle around him, revving their chainsaws in union, smiling wickedly. The truth hit Detective Scott. The dolls in the operating rooms, they weren't just gruesome decorations. They were effigies of the people that had died, transformed into relics for their indulgence. "If you put his neck that way, the vein's going to gush blood all over us all, Marnie," one of the nurses complained. A whir of chainsaws filled Detective Scott's head. The last words shattered through him as Marnie. In that instant, with fear coursing through his veins, Scott spurted all over the room. "This one needs an apple in his mouth, don't you think?" one of the student nurses asked, laughing. "You thought that was creepy? The next one will keep you up at night." Beneath the skin, she wakes. The inspector stood frozen, heart pounding in his chest like the incessant drumbeat of a dirge. The remnants of the journal, half consumed by flame, smoldered weakly at his feet. A stench of charred leather and ink hung in the suffocating air. Behind him, the doctor's mangled body contorted like a puppet yanked by unseen strings, bones snapping, flesh squelching as black ichor leaked from beneath skin stretched too tight. And the eyes, dozens of them, slick and gleaming, blinked in eerie synchronization. They opened and closed with mechanical precision, cold and detached, each one dissecting the inspector's mind inch by inch. "Inspector." A voice slithered through the darkness, coiling around his sanity. It wasn't just the dead doctor speaking. No, the voice came from within him, rasping, intimate, as if whispering from his skull's hollow places. "You looked, didn't you? You felt me, didn't you? I'm in every thought now, twisting, digging deeper." Thunk, thunk, thunk. The inspector stammered under his breath, backing away from the nightmarish sight. But his legs felt as if lead weights had been strapped to them. Panic swelled in his chest, clawing at his throat. Every instinct told him to run. Yet where could he go? The shadows had eyes, and they all belonged to her. The lantern at his feet sputtered, coughing its last gasp of light. For a split second, darkness overtook the room. When the lantern reignited in a dim flicker, the doctor's shattered body slumped lifelessly on the cot. Yet the inspector could feel her. Eve, crawling beneath his skin, burrowing into his thoughts. She was coiling tighter now, feeding off every scrap of terror he exuded. His breath came in short bursts, his vision blurred. "Stop thinking. Don't let her in." The thought thrashed in his mind like a dying animal. "Don't give her the fear she craves." But it was impossible. Every creak in the room, every shift in shadow seemed to grow a life of its own. From the corner of his eye, something moved. A slow, deliberate ripple, like the stirring of a beast awakening from slumber. The darkness watched him. And then, the sound. A low, wet scrape, flesh peeling, something being birthed from the wreckage of the dead man on the cot. From the gaping chasm where the doctor's face had once been, the unmistakable sound of lips parting filled the room. The inspector's heart stopped as a single, slurred whisper slithered out from the darkness. "Inspector." He spun toward the door, heart hammering, blood thundering in his ears. His hands scrambled for the latch, but it wouldn't budge. No. No. Fuck. No. He clawed at it, feeling the panic rise in waves. And then he saw it, reflected dimly in the narrow window of the door. Her eye. It sat where the doctor's face used to be, impossibly large, the triple irises spinning hypnotically, drawing him in. The sight was nauseatingly perfect, more real than anything else in the room. His breath hitched in his throat as he stood helpless, mesmerized by the gaze burrowing deeper and deeper into his psyche. A voice, his own, chuckled somewhere in his mind. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Terror erupted through him like wildfire. "Look away!" his rational mind screamed, but his body refused to listen. The pull was too strong. His head throbbed as though invisible claws were burrowing deep into his skull, splintering his thoughts like shards of glass. He blinked. The cell door creaked open, and with it came the darkness. Thick and alive, it slithered toward him like a living fog. He staggered back, dragging his body toward the desk, gasping for air as the eye-filled shadows closed in. And then the whispers began. Soft at first, but they grew louder. A cacophony of overlapping voices, all carrying her taunting message. "In every shadow, Inspector. In every empty corridor, in every flicker of candlelight, you will see me. You will fear me." The inspector's mind snapped. A scream ripped from his throat, high and ragged, a sound no rational man could produce. He tore at his clothes, his nails digging into his skin as if he could rip her out. He slammed his head against the desk, desperate to expel the monster coiling within him. But it was no use. She was in him now. She was him. His trembling hands reached blindly for the revolver on his desk. The cold metal felt reassuring, solid, an anchor in the storm of madness that consumed him. But just as he raised it to his temple, the voice in his mind whispered again, "No need for that, Inspector." Her tone was sickeningly sweet, almost affectionate. "We have so much work to do, so many minds left to explore." The inspector let out a broken sob, the gun slipping from his grasp. His reflection stared back at him from the window, only it wasn't his reflection anymore. The face staring back at him was hers. 3 irises, 3 pupils, and a smile that stretched just a little too wide. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside the inspector's office, the lantern's flame flickered weakly, and then went out,